For 3 years after my wife died, I worked nights at 68 because my daughter told me the hospice bills had swallowed everything we owned. I believed her. I believed her when she said the bookstore was barely hanging on. I believed her when she said the tax notices were piling up. I believed her when she said my wife had died with nothing left but debt, unpaid invoices, and a legacy too fragile to save. So I did what old men do when grief leaves them with more love than good sense. I sold my truck. I refinanced the machine shop behind my house. I stopped playing golf on Fridays. I started taking overnight maintenance shifts at the distribution warehouse off Route 9. And every month, I sent my daughter money. Not because she demanded it. That would have been easier to see. No, Amelia always asked the right way. With shame. With hesitation. With that tired little pause in her voice that made every request sound like something she hated to say out loud. Dad, I'm sorry. Dad, I'll pay you back. Dad, I know Mom would hate this. Dad, I'm just trying to keep her store alive. That last line always got me. Because the store was not just a store. Hawthorne Books had been my wife's life before it became her name on a brass plaque. A narrow old brick building on Willow Street with creaky floors, tall front windows, and a bell over the door that never sounded the same twice. Some people remembered Lena Hawthorne as the woman who read stories to children every Saturday morning. Some remembered her as the local author who somehow turned a small-town bookstore into a regional favorite. I remembered her as the woman who could stand behind a register, recommend a novel, calm a crying child, and argue with a supplier on the phone all in under 5 minutes without ever looking rattled. She had a gift for making people feel seen. It sounds simple. It isn't. Simple people are everywhere. People who make you feel seen are rare. When cancer took her, half the town came to the funeral. Teachers, parents, former students, grown men in work boots who had not read a full book in 20 years but still came because Lena once helped their daughter fall in love with reading. That was my wife. And when she was dying, she said one thing to Amelia over and over: protect the store. So when Amelia called me crying 6 weeks after the funeral and said the hospice bills were worse than expected, and the shop accounts were thinner than anyone knew, and the seasonal slump had hit harder than forecast, I did not question her. I stepped in. That is what fathers do when the daughter who stayed is asking for help carrying the thing her mother loved most. My son Daniel lived in Oregon by then. We were never enemies. Just one of those father and son pairs that ran out of easy conversation too early and never found it again. He called after the funeral, sent flowers, sent one check, then went back to his life. Amelia stayed. Amelia handled the estate paperwork. Amelia met with the accountant. Amelia took over the vendor calls. Amelia learned the ordering system, the author events, the school discounts, the payroll schedule. Amelia cried in private and performed strength in public. That is what I thought anyway. At 68, with bad knees, a weak shoulder, and a widow's silence waiting for me in every room of my house, I was grateful one of my children had stayed close enough to help me carry what was left. That is how lies work best. They do not arrive wearing a black coat and carrying a knife. They come wearing responsibility. The first year, the money felt temporary. A bridge, a rough season, a hard patch. The second year, it became routine. The furnace needed replacing in the back office. Insurance rates jumped. A school order got delayed. An author event underperformed. A tax payment came due at the wrong time. A roof leak in the rear stockroom warped 3 cartons of first editions. The espresso machine for the cafe corner died on a Thursday before a poetry night. The antiquated point-of-sale system had to be upgraded because, according to Amelia, a modern store could not survive without modern payment software. Every month there was something. Always plausible, always boring, always just serious enough to feel real. And because grief makes you hate conflict, I stopped asking for details. Details lead to doubt. Doubt leads to confrontation. Confrontation forces you to admit that maybe the person standing in front of you is not as helpless or honest as you need them to be. So I did not ask. I paid. I told myself I was keeping Lena's world alive. I told myself I was helping my daughter stand where her mother used to stand. I told myself exhaustion was noble if the right thing came out of it. Then, on a rainy Thursday in October, everything cracked open because of a man named Howard Pike at First National Bank. Howard had known my wife for 15 years. He was the kind of banker who still shook hands properly and still wore suits that looked expensive without ever trying to be young. I stopped by that afternoon to sign a refinance document on the shop. Nothing dramatic, nothing unusual. He looked over the paperwork, frowned, and then said something that made my whole body go cold. "Thomas, can I ask you something strange?" I remember smiling, tired, distracted, still thinking about a leaking compressor line I needed to deal with later that evening. "Go ahead." He adjusted his glasses and looked at me the way people look at old dogs right before they decide whether to say something painful. "Why did you stop depositing Lena's royalty checks?" I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because my mind could not catch up fast enough to do anything smarter. "What royalty checks?" He frowned. The quarterly transfers, Hawthorne Children's Series, regional syndication and reprint licensing. They've been coming in for years. The room did not spin, that would have been easier. No, it just narrowed. The fluorescent lights, the leather chair, the edge of his desk, the sound of rain against the bank window, all of it suddenly felt too sharp. I stared at him and said, very slowly, "Howard, as far as I know, my wife died broke." That was the moment his face changed. Not confusion, recognition. The kind that says a man has just realized he knows something you were never supposed to find out. And that was the moment I understood one terrible thing. For 3 years, I had not been saving my wife's bookstore. I had been financing my daughter's lie. Howard locked his office door before he said another word. Not in a theatrical way. Not like some man in a crime movie about to pull classified files from a hidden drawer. Just a quiet click. Professional. Careful. The kind of click that tells you the truth is about to get expensive. "Thomas," he said, "sit down." I was already sitting, but I sat deeper. Harder. Like a man preparing for impact. Howard opened a side drawer and pulled out a file. Not thick, not dramatic, just a tan folder with my wife's name written on the tab in letters. Lena Hawthorne. He set it on the desk between us the way a doctor sets down a scan before telling you where the trouble is. "Your wife had 3 income streams tied to the store and her books," he said. "Retail operating revenue, author royalties, and a small legacy endowment set up through a trust after her second children's series took off. Not enough to turn anyone into a celebrity, enough to matter." My mouth had gone dry. She never mentioned an endowment. "That doesn't surprise me," he said gently. Lena disliked talking about money as if it were anything but a tool. But yes, there was one. Quarterly distributions, modest but steady. She arranged for them to feed into the operating account and a secondary estate reserve unless otherwise directed by the executor. Executor. That word hit me on a delay. "Amelia," "Yes," Howard said. "And she redirected it?" He opened the folder, slid 3 statements toward me. The account numbers meant nothing at first. The dates meant everything. 4 months after Lena's funeral, then 8 months after, then 1 year and 1 month, quarter after quarter. Transfers marked licensing payment, reserve release, distribution, each time routed into an account I did not recognize. "What account is that?" I asked. He exhaled through his nose. "I cannot discuss the ownership of another person's private account without cause, but I can say this. The original bookstore operating account stopped receiving those deposits shortly after your wife's death." I looked up sharply. "Stopped? Yes. Then where did they go?" His eyes held mine. "Thomas, I need you to tell me something first. Are you aware of any authorized change to the estate instruction letter? Any amendment, any trust redirection, any agreement signed by you or the executor in the presence of counsel?" No. That word came out rough, too loud, like a bark. Howard nodded once, then said, "There may be an explanation, but if there is, it should not be this hard for you to find it." I stared at the statements again. Quarterly transfers. Steady. Real. My wife had not died broke. Or if she had not stayed broke, and the money had been moving somewhere for 3 years while I worked warehouse nights and sent my daughter checks so she could keep the lights on in a store that apparently had other income all along. "How much?" I asked. Howard did not answer immediately. He knew what I meant. He also knew the number would change the room. Over 3 years, between the royalties and the trust distributions, just under $243,000. I sat there in complete silence. I wish I could tell you I rose calmly and started asking perfect questions. I wish I could tell you age and grief had made me wiser by then. But all I really remember is one thought. I sold my truck, that stupid old truck. A 2004 Ford I had driven for 12 years. Paint fading, seat cracked, nothing special to anyone else. But it was mine, paid off, useful, reliable. I sold it because Amelia said the bookstore needed help surviving winter. Now a man in a bank office was telling me my wife had been earning money the entire time. Howard spoke again, carefully. "There's more." I looked up. "Your wife kept a safety box here." I frowned. "Since when?" "Since 2012. Small box. Annual renewal by autodraft. Only Lena and 1 alternate access name were authorized." My throat tightened. "Who?" Howard slid a paper toward me. There, in her neat slanted handwriting, was my wife's name, and under alternate authorized access, mine. Not Amelia. Mine. I stared at it so long the letters started to blur. "Why did nobody tell me?" "Because nobody asked," Howard said quietly. After the funeral, Amelia handled the visible estate matters. Tax forms, vendor notices, death certificates. She told us she would return later with you for the box if needed. She never did. Then the renewal continued automatically through an estate reserve instruction. I closed my eyes for a second. My wife had left something in a box only I could open, and for 3 years I never knew to ask. That is what grief does. It narrows you, makes you easy to steer. "Can I open it now?" I asked. Howard checked the clock, then looked back at me. "Yes, but Thomas, before we do, I need to say something uncomfortable. Go ahead. If someone kept this information from you while also accepting money from you under false premises, you should not confront them until you understand the paper. People who redirect funds usually do not tell only one lie. Only one lie. That turned out to be the truest thing he could have said. The safety box was smaller than I expected. Old brushed steel. One of those boring things people imagine contain jewels and blackmail when most of them hold insurance papers and dead relatives' wedding bands. Howard led me to the viewing room and left me alone. The box held 4 things: a folded letter, a packet of documents tied with a blue ribbon, a flash drive, and an envelope marked in Lena's handwriting, "For Thomas only, if you ever start doubting the story they give you." I did not open the envelope first. Maybe I should have. Maybe some part of me was still too frightened of what my wife might have seen before she died. Instead, I took out the folded letter. It was short, not a legal document, not a secret confession, just a note. "Thomas, if you are opening this without me, then I'm sorry for the way time turned out. You never liked paper unless it had a purpose, so let me get to mine. I have made provisions for the store, the books, and the children. Not equal provisions. Careful ones. If everything goes the way I hope, none of this will feel necessary. If it does not, then do 2 things before you trust anyone speaking in a tired voice. First, read every page in the blue packet. Second, ask yourself who benefits most from your guilt. I love you. I always will. And if you are doubting your own instincts, please stop. They are often slow. They are rarely wrong. Lena." I sat down in the little chair in that gray bank room and read it 3 times. Who benefits most from your guilt? That line did not just hurt. It rearranged me. Because suddenly the last 3 years looked different. Not like hardship, like extraction. I opened the blue packet, and that was where the real damage started. The first documents were trust summaries, readable versions, not just legal nonsense. Lena had always known I hated legal language unless somebody translated it into English. The trust covered the bookstore building, the inventory, the author rights to her backlist, the future royalties from her books, and a secondary reserve account she had built slowly over 12 years. I turned pages, names, percentages, triggers. Then I hit the distribution plan. It was not what Amelia had described to me, not even close. The bookstore building was left to me for life use and oversight, not outright ownership. Oversight. A trust-controlled structure designed to keep the property from being sold quickly under emotional pressure. After my death, ownership would pass to both children in equal shares unless one of them had attempted to liquidate, redirect, or conceal trust assets during my lifetime. If either child had done that, the innocent child inherited the controlling interest. My hands froze on the paper. Then I read the next clause. The author royalties were to be deposited into an operating fund for Hawthorne Books, with quarterly summaries mailed to me directly as primary life overseer. Amelia was designated day-to-day manager only if she provided transparent bookkeeping and annual review. If she failed transparency, operational authority reverted to me automatically upon written notice from the bank or trust council. Automatically. The room got colder. That meant 3 things at once. My wife had not left the bookstore drowning. She had protected it. She had not left me out of the finances. She had placed me at the center of them. And if the bank noticed anything suspicious, control was supposed to come back to me. So why had it not? Because nobody had told me the rules, and because somebody had kept the summaries from me. I turned to the next page. Counsel of Record, Ruth Alvarez. I actually said her name out loud, Ruth, my wife's friend. A lawyer I had not spoken to in almost 4 years because after Lena died, Amelia told me Ruth was tied up with a probate matter in another county and had advised reducing outside legal costs. Reduce outside legal costs. I almost laughed. Instead, I felt sick. My wife had put the store under a trust with rules, named Ruth as counsel, named me as life overseer. And Amelia had somehow managed to take control of the story anyway. I looked at the flash drive then, did not touch it, not yet. I knew enough already to understand one terrible thing. The life I had been living since Lena's death was not just based on grief. It was based on edited information. Before I opened the final envelope, I used Howard's office phone and called the only number that suddenly mattered. Ruth Alvarez answered on the 4th ring. Her voice had not changed. Still dry, still low, still carrying the kind of patience only people who spend their lives around lies manage to develop. Alvarez, it's Thomas Hawthorne. Silence, then one quiet word. Finally, I looked through the glass at Howard, pretending not to listen, then back at the papers in front of me, then at my wife's handwriting. Ruth, I said, I think my daughter has been lying to me for 3 years. No, Ruth said. Her voice went very still. I think your daughter has been lying to you much longer than that. I drove from the bank to Ruth's office with both hands locked to the steering wheel hard enough to ache by the time I got there. Her office sat above an old dental practice on Maple Street, in a 2-story brick building with windows that never seemed fully clean, no matter the season. A brass plate near the door still read Alvarez Legal, even though she had technically retired from full practice 2 years earlier and now took only select matters and, as she once put it, work involving idiots with money and families with worse taste. Lena loved her. Not because Ruth was warm. Ruth was not warm, not in any way the greeting card industry would appreciate, Lena loved her because Ruth was honest, without making a performance out of honesty. Because she read paper the way good surgeons read scans. And because once, 12 years earlier, when a distributor tried to slide a predatory exclusivity clause into a bookstore contract, Ruth found it in under 3 minutes and said, "Any man who uses this much polite language to take your options away should not be trusted near cash." I should have called her years ago. That was the feeling that met me on the stairs. Not anger first, shame. Ruth opened the door before I knocked twice. She had gone grayer. That was the first thing I noticed. Not weaker, just grayer. Haircut sharp at the jaw, dark sweater, reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She took one look at my face and stepped aside. No hug, no false softness, no shocked performance. That was Ruth's version of kindness. I went in, sat in the leather chair across from her desk, put the trust packet, the note, and the envelope down between us without speaking. She glanced at the top page, then at my face. "You found the box." "Yes." "At the bank?" "Yes." Howard finally pushed. I frowned. "Finally?" Ruth took off her glasses and set them down carefully. "Thomas, your wife wrote me a letter 12 days before she died. She told me if you did not come to me on your own within 6 months of her passing, I was not to force the issue unless the bank flagged something structural. She believed grief would make you retreat from legal detail. She also believed Amelia would try to stand in the doorway of every practical conversation and tell you she had already handled it." I felt my mouth go dry again. "Lena knew?" "Lena feared," Ruth said. She did not claim certainty. She feared Amelia's hunger and your willingness to confuse relief with trust if someone promised to carry the ugly paper for you. Hunger. That word was so much more accurate than greed, it made my chest hurt. "Why didn't you call me anyway?" "I nearly did. Twice. But your wife was specific. She wanted you to choose knowledge, not have it dropped on your head while you were still bleeding. And for the first year after the funeral, Amelia kept things tidy enough on the surface to avoid a formal trigger. She opened a drawer and pulled out a file thicker than mine, then another, then a third. I stared at them. "What is all that?" "The last 3 years," she said, "or as much of them as I could collect while being politely kept at arm's length by your daughter." I think I stopped breathing for a second. "You knew something was wrong." "I knew something was off," Ruth corrected. "Wrong is what we are about to determine." Off began 2 months after Lena's funeral. She opened the first file. Inside were printed emails, bank notices, draft letters, and handwritten notes in her tight, angular script. Lena's trust required an annual review packet, signed by the acting store manager and acknowledged by the life overseer. That was you. The first year, Amelia sent me a review packet without your acknowledgement. She claimed you were emotionally overwhelmed and had orally approved her managing the entire structure. I never approved that. I know. Then why? Because oral claims are easy. Proving they are false after the fact takes leverage. I wrote requesting your signature directly. Amelia responded that you were ill with pneumonia and not taking mail. The second time, she said you had delegated finances to her because you could not emotionally handle seeing Lena's numbers. I stared at her. She said that, word for word. Ruth flipped a page. Then she told me you had decided to simplify matters by reducing legal expenses and letting the store operate informally for a year. I rubbed a hand over my face. I never said any of that. I know. The room went quiet. The repetition of that sentence started to feel like a hammer. I know, I know, I know. Every time she said it, another piece of the life I had trusted fell off. "Why didn't you go around her?" "I tried," Ruth said, 3 times. The first time I mailed a letter to your house marked personal and urgent. It was returned as undeliverable due to addressee relocation notation. A false notation, obviously. The second time I called and was told by Amelia that you were on an extended road trip to manage your health. The third time I showed up at the store and your daughter greeted me at the counter like I was there to poison the children's section. That almost made me laugh. Almost. She told me, Ruth continued, that you wanted distance from all legal discussion because you were under stress, and she implied that if I kept pushing, I would be worsening your grief and threatening the store's fragile stability. I looked down at the file. "So she used me," "Yes," Ruth said, "but she used your pain more effectively than she used you." That distinction mattered. Pain feels moral, which makes it a useful disguise for exploitation. Ruth slid one sheet forward. This is where it stops looking merely slippery and starts looking deliberate. It was a copy of an email from Amelia to a bookkeeper named Paul Hendricks, date stamped 15 months after Lena's death. Subject line, route change. The body was short. "Paul, from this quarter on, send all rights deposits to the reserve holding account first, not store operations. Dad cannot handle seeing fluctuating income right now, and Ruth is to be treated as external only unless I approve contact." I read it twice. Reserve holding account. "What is that?" Ruth pointed to another page. "A business account opened under a management entity called Willow Street Cultural Holdings." Never heard of it. Of course not. Amelia formed it 7 months after Lena died. Sole member at formation, Amelia Hawthorne. My stomach turned. "She made a company." "Yes." "To do what?" to stand between the money and the place it was supposed to go. Ruth's office felt very small all of a sudden. The clean lines, the old radiator by the wall, the framed law degree, all of it too sharp and still. Did she steal it? I asked. Ruth held my gaze. Thomas, when a manager reroutes trust-linked income away from the designated operating account while continuing to solicit external support on the premise of shortage, the kindest word available is diversion. Diversion. Lawyers have soft words for hard things. Sometimes that annoys me. That day I understood why. The hard word arrived soon enough. How much did she divert? Ruth flipped through another statement summary. Known amount from royalties and reserve distributions, $242,000 and change. Potential secondary use through vendor reimbursements, unclear. Potential undisclosed cash intake through event revenue, still unclear. And I gave her another $109,000 over 3 years, Ruth said before I could finish. I added what you told Howard. Monthly support, seasonal cash, emergency transfers, and the truck proceeds you discussed with Lena before she died. Conservative estimate. I felt the chair under me again in a new way, like it had to reintroduce itself. $350,000. That was what the life looked like now. Not just grief, not just family. Numbers. Did the store need any of it? I asked. Some, Ruth said. Not all. The store had normal operating costs, roof work, payroll strain in winter, utility swings, inventory gaps, but not collapse, not even close. Lena built enough cushion to keep a modest store alive through bad seasons. If Amelia had simply managed honestly, the place would have been fine. Then why tell me it was drowning? Ruth did not answer immediately. She looked at the file instead, then at me. Because drowning people get rescued, and rescued people don't audit the boat. That line sat in the room between us for a long time. Finally, I asked the question I had been avoiding since the bank. What was in the last envelope? The one marked for you only if you started doubting the story, she said. Did you open it? No. Open it now. So I did. Inside was a second letter from Lena. Longer. No softness in it. Still hers, but written by the version of my wife who knew time might run out before other people's decency did. Thomas, if this envelope is open, then something I hoped would remain only a fear has probably started to happen. Amelia has many gifts. Efficiency. Charm. The ability to sound burdened rather than entitled. But she also has one dangerous trait she has hidden since she was 13. She confuses staying with deserving. She believes that the child who remains nearby is owed the center of the story. That belief can become useful when life is unfair. It can also become predatory when money and grief enter the room together. If Amelia has told you, I left only debt, do not believe her until you see a statement with your own eyes. If she tells you the store needs secrecy to survive, do not believe her. If she tries to make Ruth sound expensive, dramatic, or unnecessary, do not believe her. And if she ever uses my illness to rush your judgment, please remember that I have spent my whole adult life protecting this store from men who used urgency to take what patience built. My daughter may someday do the same in softer clothes. There are pages attached to the drive explaining why I changed the trust in the final year. Do not confront her without paper. Do not accuse her without dates. And do not let your guilt do her bookkeeping. I love you, Lena. For a while, neither Ruth nor I said anything. Then Ruth said, very gently for Ruth, she knew her children. I folded the letter slowly and put it back in the envelope because otherwise I might have torn it. What's on the drive? Ruth looked at the bank box items, then at me. Probably the part your wife did not trust paper alone to carry. She had a small office safe here for years, I said. I barely ever looked at it. Your wife knew that if she told you she had a digital backup of anything, you'd forget it existed within a month, Ruth said. That is why she put it in steel and wrote notes like clues for a stubborn widower. I almost smiled. Lena would have liked that description. Ruth plugged the drive into her computer. A folder opened, then subfolders. Trust amendment notes, store operations backup, royalty contracts, letters, recordings. I looked up. She recorded things? Apparently so. The first audio file was labeled December 14th, counter conversation. Ruth clicked it. The sound quality was not perfect. A little room echo, a little street noise, the faint clink of ceramic cups. Then my wife's voice. You're rushing too fast, Amelia. Then Amelia. You waited too long on everything. Dad doesn't even look at numbers unless somebody forces him. My whole body locked. Lena answered calmly, because she always sounded calm first when she saw a cliff. Your father does not have to love numbers to deserve honesty. I heard a chair move. Then Amelia again, tighter now. I am the one staying. Daniel gets to live 12 states away and send sympathy from an airport. I'm the one here. I'm the one doing inventory, payroll, events, and your appointments. If anything goes wrong after you're gone, you expect me to carry all of it and still ask permission from men who weren't here. That line punched harder than I expected, because it was not completely false. That is what made it dangerous. People justify theft best when they begin with a real wound. Lena's voice softened. Staying is not ownership, Amelia. No. But it should count more than leaving. I looked away from the computer screen. My daughter had been arguing for the center of the story while her mother was still alive. Not stealing yet, maybe, not fully, but circling it. Naming the logic that would later let her do whatever she wanted and still call it burden. Ruth stopped the audio and opened another file. A memo dictated by Lena to herself. Calm, practical, no dramatics. If Amelia continues pushing to simplify oversight, reroute communication, or isolate Thomas from the store's paper, I need to tighten the trust. Not because I think she is evil. Because I think resentment paired with proximity can turn ordinary self-justification into entitlement faster than people realize. She loves us. She also wants to be rewarded for staying. That combination can be expensive. I put both hands flat on the desk. She saw it all. Not all, Ruth said. Enough. Then why didn't she stop Amelia herself? Ruth looked at me for a long second before answering. Because your wife was dying, Thomas. She did what dying people sometimes do when they still love the person they fear. She built barriers instead of wars. She hoped the barriers would be enough. That nearly broke me. Because now I could see her clearly. Sick, tired, still trying to protect the store, me, and a daughter she could no longer fully trust. Still hoping legal structure would do the work love could no longer safely do. I looked at the trust packet again. What happens now? Ruth folded her hands. Now we do this right. We verify what's missing. We map every diversion. We determine whether the bookstore itself is actually profitable. We find out who else Amelia used. And until we know enough to survive the first lie she tells back, you act like none of this exists. I nodded slowly. Can I do that? She gave me the faintest hint of a smile. Thomas, you spent 32 years married to Lena. You learned how to sit in silence while someone else planned the better move. Yes, you can act normal for a few days. I stood to leave, but Ruth stopped me with one last question. Has Amelia ever tried to move you out of your house? Sell the shop? Suggest simplifying your life. Any conversations about fatigue, memory, or not wanting you to worry over details? I thought about the past year, the way Amelia sometimes said things with too much concern wrapped around them. Dad, you shouldn't wear yourself out at the shop forever. Dad, maybe you should let Daniel handle the property papers if something happens. Dad, if the store ever gets too complicated, we can always sell before it turns ugly. Dad, stress is hard on older minds. Mom worried about that with you. My stomach tightened again. Yes, I said quietly. She has. Ruth reached for a fresh yellow pad, then we moved faster. The next 4 days taught me something I wish I had learned years earlier. A lie does not feel like a lie while you are inside it. It feels like maintenance. It feels like errands. It feels like family. It feels like doing what must be done while life is hard. Only once you step outside it do you start seeing how many ordinary things had been arranged in one direction. Ruth spent Friday and most of Saturday working her channels. Public filings, bank triggers, trust notices, vendor records, anything she could touch without tipping Amelia off. I spent the same days doing something much more humiliating. I watched my own daughter, not dramatically, not from bushes, nothing that would impress a television writer. I just went to the bookstore and paid attention the way I should have been paying attention all along. Hawthorne Books opened at 9. I arrived at 10:15 on Friday with a cardboard tray of coffee and a box of muffins, because that was exactly the sort of thing a slightly guilty father trying to be supportive would do. The bell over the door rang twice when I came in. That old off-note double ring I knew so well. For one stupid second, it nearly made me feel safe. Then I looked around. Nothing about the place looked like it was dying. That was the first shock. Not because I expected collapsing shelves and dark windows, that would have been too obvious. No, what shocked me was health. The easy kind, the expensive kind. New rug in the children's corner, fresh paint near the register, 3 new display tables, a revised cafe menu chalked in Amelia's careful handwriting, a front window installation featuring autumn hardcovers stacked beside velvet pumpkins and brass candlesticks that definitely had not come from my wife's old decorating habits. Customers moved easily through the aisles. A mother with 2 kids near picture books, a retired couple in travel essays, a teenager in the back poetry section. The cafe tables half full at 10 in the morning. My daughter stood at the front counter in a camel-colored sweater smiling at a woman holding a tote bag and a hardcover. She looked good. Too good. Not just physically, operationally. The kind of compose that comes from abundance, not barely surviving. That should not have hit me as hard as it did, but it did. Because for 3 years I had been picturing her doing algebra with pain, deciding which bill could slide another week, pretending calm with creditors on the phone. Holding together a business 1 inch above water, instead she looked like a woman running a polished place that had every reason to expect next month. She saw me, smiled, and came around the counter. Dad, what a surprise. That line again. A small thing. But in family lies, small lines do a lot of work. Why surprise? Why not nice to see you? Why not thanks for coming? Surprise meant she had not expected me to appear in the middle of operations. Surprise meant my physical presence in the actual business space was no longer normal enough to feel unremarkable. Brought coffee, I said. You didn't have to do that. No, but I did. She kissed my cheek, lightly, then took the tray from me. For the staff, I asked. Of course. She called out to two employees, Marisol from the cafe and Evan from receiving. Both came forward smiling and thanking me with the easy warmth people use around a man they have been taught is generous and harmless. Amelia introduced me like I was a donor. Guys, this is my dad. He's the reason the lights stayed on our first year after Mom. That sentence landed like a nail under the skin, our first year. Not every year, not constant emergency. The first year. I smiled, said something stupid about coffee being cheaper than payroll and let the moment pass. Because Ruth was right. Do it with paper, not ego. I stayed for an hour, walked the store, talked to customers, listened. At 11:30, a woman in a long green coat told me she drove 40 minutes once a month because, in her words, this place always feels alive. At 11:47, a grandfather asked Amelia if the spring author dinner tickets would open earlier this year because they sold out in 2 days last time. At noon, a school librarian came in to confirm a large winter order and casually mentioned the store had become the district's preferred partner for curated reading bundles. Alive, sold out, preferred partner. None of those words belonged to the story Amelia had been selling me. Then I made the first useful mistake of the weekend. I wandered into the back office without warning. Not storming, just carrying empty coffee cups and doing what I had done 1,000 times when Lena was alive, helping myself through the employees' only door like I still belonged in a place my wife had built. Amelia turned too fast when she saw me. Not panic, but close enough to be cousin to panic. "Dad, what's wrong?" I asked. "Nothing." She smiled too quickly. "Just vendor stuff everywhere." I looked. The office was neat enough on the surface. A desk, inventory board, orders stacked by date, printer humming. But on the desk was something she should not have left visible if the story she sold me had been true. A floral arrangement receipt for $680, premium event decor, upcoming community partner reception. I touched it. Big event. She reached out immediately and took it from my hand. "Fundraiser," she said, "for visibility. It's mostly sponsored." Mostly. That word did the same kind of work Surprise had done. I nodded, set the empty cups down, then looked at the wall calendar. The date squares were packed. Author lunch, teacher appreciation night, private collector preview, media interview, seasonal children's launch. Not the calendar of a collapsing store, the calendar of a store with momentum. Amelia followed my eyes and gave a tired little smile. "Appearances, Dad. That's half the business now, of course." She relaxed just enough to believe that line had done its job. I left at 1:10, drove home, sat in my kitchen, and made a list. Store looks healthy, staff relaxed. Customers mentioned sold-out events, school district order, private preview, expensive decor receipt, packed calendar, first-year phrase. By 3 that afternoon, Ruth called. I found the accountant. What accountant? The real one. Not the volunteer bookkeeper Amelia has been showing in community newsletters. "Your wife worked for 10 years with a CPA named Harold Mencken. Retired last year. He thought the estate was moved to someone local after Lena died. It wasn't. Amelia just stopped returning his calls after month 4. Can he talk? He can, if you don't ask dumb questions." That was Ruth saying yes. Harold Mencken lived in a condo building 2 towns over and smelled faintly of pipe tobacco even though he told me he had quit 8 years earlier. He was 81, sharp as wire. He wore suspenders and had the kind of eyebrows old men develop when their body decides subtlety is no longer necessary. He opened the door, looked me over once and said, "Lena would be furious it took you this long. Not hello, not come in, just that." I deserved it. Inside, his living room looked like the inside of a patient tax return. Stacks, labeled boxes, papers clipped and banded with little white tabs. He led me to a table by the window and sat down with a legal pad. "Ruth told me the short version," he said. "So now I'm going to ask you one question and I need a straight answer. Do you want family peace or financial truth? Those are different things?" I asked. "At my age," he said, "they usually are. Financial truth. Good. Then stop defending your daughter in advance." That stung because I knew he saw I was still doing exactly that in my head. He opened a file, not Amelia's books. Lena's last year. "Your wife wasn't rich," he said. "She was organized. There's a difference. Rich people think money forgives them. Organized people understand money obeys structure. Lena built structure." He began listing it off, a profitable but modest bookstore with cyclical pressure and strong local loyalty. A backlist children's series still licensed regionally in 4 states. A small but real reserve account from foreign reprint rights. No hospice debt large enough to threaten the estate. A planned renovation budget for the upstairs reading room that had not yet been used. And one major pending possibility Lena did not talk about publicly because she disliked celebrating before signatures dried. "What possibility?" I asked. He looked at me over the file. "A national reissue package." I frowned. "For what?" "Her Sparrow Hollow books." I actually laughed. Not in mockery, in disbelief. "Those old picture books?" He blinked. "Yes, those old picture books that sold 250,000 copies over time and kept selling quietly every spring to schools and grandparents who liked your wife better than algorithmic nonsense." I sat back. "National reissue. Yes. Hardcover anniversary editions. Audio rights. Gift editions." There were conversations late in her final year. She delayed the formal push because of her health. But the contracts were alive enough to matter. If executed, they would increase royalty flow substantially. How substantially? Enough that a struggling manager might be tempted to get creative before a parent noticed. I stared at the table. Amelia knew? Harold gave me a flat look. Thomas, your daughter handled the call notes for one of the reissue meetings herself. That changed the room again, because now this was not just lying after death. This was premeditated timing around future money. He slid another sheet forward. This is why I stopped trying to work through her politely. It was a letter he had written 18 months after Lena's death. Never mailed. Marked draft. To Amelia Hawthorne. Please be advised that absent transparent reporting, supporting invoices, and verification of the operating account destination, I can no longer certify that the structure of Hawthorne Books aligns with the estate planning directives established by Lena Hawthorne and Trust Counsel Ruth Alvarez. Continued use of grief-based verbal explanations without documentary support does not constitute bookkeeping. I looked up slowly. Grief-based verbal explanations. He actually smiled then, thin, dangerous. The smile of a taxman who has finally found language sharp enough. That was her whole method, he said. She never answered a financial question directly if she could answer the emotional version of it instead. I closed my eyes for a second. That sentence summarized almost everything. What else? Harold opened another file and tapped a column in red. Payroll. I looked. That's high. No, he said. That's honest. What's dishonest is that she told you she was underpaying staff to keep the place alive. In fact, she increased discretionary payroll during 2 of the same years she was telling you there wasn't enough cash to make winter inventory. Discretionary payroll, brand consultant, event photographer, social media manager, seasonal hospitality contractor. All nice things. None signs of collapse. He leaned back. Your daughter wasn't saving a dying bookstore, Thomas. She was using your money to protect expansion and vanity while diverting her mother's income away from the places it should have gone. Vanity. That word fit too. Not as well as hunger, but it fit. When I left Harold's condo, my understanding of Amelia had become even worse and, strangely, more human. That is the curse of adulthood. The people who hurt you rarely turn into cartoon villains. They become themselves more efficiently. Amelia wanted credit, security, a life larger than the store could honestly afford, and she had found the perfect raw materials to build it. My grief, my guilt, my wife's legacy, and money nobody else was tracking carefully enough. Saturday night, Ruth called again. How close are you to doing something stupid? Not as close as yesterday, I said. Good, because tomorrow you're going to church. I frowned. What? St. Bartholomew's. 9:30 service. Your daughter will be there. So will most of the people who think Hawthorne Books is one brave widow's daughter, keeping culture alive through hardship. And why am I going? Because after church, there's a donor breakfast. Amelia's on the board this year. I want you to hear how she talks when she's selling the public version of herself. That might be the most educational sentence Ruth ever gave me. The donor breakfast was held in the parish hall under fluorescent lights and framed watercolor prints nobody had actually noticed in 20 years. Tables with white paper cloths, bad coffee, scrambled eggs that somehow managed to be both wet and overdone. Amelia moved through the room like she belonged to every inch of it, shaking hands, laughing softly, touching sleeves, receiving sympathy with humility and admiration with just enough reluctance to make people trust it. I sat near the back with Ruth and said very little. Then Amelia was asked to speak. Just a few words about the community literacy partnership, someone said. She stood, smiled, looked out over the room with that exact expression Lena used to wear when about to read aloud to children, and then she used my wife's face to sell herself. She spoke about grief, about preserving what matters, about the courage of small business during hard seasons, about inherited responsibility, about how sometimes family does not get to rest because love asks more of those who stay behind. Those who stay behind. There it was, the whole operating theology in one phrase. She did not mention me by name. But she did say, with one hand resting lightly on the podium, I'm grateful my father trusted me enough to carry what my mother built. The room looked at me, smiling, respectful, warm. I nodded because what else could I do? And in that exact moment, I understood the ugliest part of all of this. Amelia had not just taken money. She had taken narrative. She had turned herself into the visible heir of Lena Hawthorne's goodness while quietly siphoning the actual structure that goodness had built. That is a theft harder to talk about than cash, because people forgive money faster than they forgive stolen meaning. After the breakfast, a woman from the Arts Council came over to me and said, "You must be very proud of Amelia. She's carrying your wife's legacy beautifully." I smiled. My jaw hurt from smiling. On the drive home, Ruth said nothing for the first 10 minutes. Then finally, she's good. Yes. That almost makes it worse. Yes. We rode the rest of the way in silence. By Sunday afternoon, I knew 3 things with certainty. My wife had not died broke, the store had not been drowning, and Amelia had built her entire public image on a lie polished smooth enough that half the town would defend her before asking to see a statement. What I did not know yet was whether she had acted alone. That answer came from Oregon. Daniel called Sunday night at 8:14. I almost let it ring out because my brain had no room left for family. Then I saw his name and picked up. "Hey, Dad." His voice still carried that slight flattening from years out west, softened edges, different pace. "Hey, you sound tired," he said. "I'm fine." "No, you're not." There was a pause. Then he sighed. "Amelia called me this morning." Everything in me stiffened. "What did she say?" "That you've been acting strange. Digging around the store, asking questions about money. She said grief anniversaries do this to you sometimes." I sat down slowly. "Did she, Dad? What's going on?" I looked out the kitchen window at the dark yard. Then I said something I had not expected to say out loud yet. "I think your sister has been stealing from your mother's estate." Silence. Then Daniel said, very quietly, "It's worse than that." That sentence changed everything all over again. I stood up so fast the chair scraped against the kitchen floor. "Worse how?" Daniel did not answer immediately. I could hear him breathing. Traffic maybe in the background. A dog barking somewhere faint. Life continuing in Oregon while mine started splitting open again. 2 years ago, he said, Amelia asked me to sign something. My throat tightened. What kind of something? She said it was a family simplification packet, temporary transfer language so she could manage the store without me getting hit with tax complications from 2 states. She said Mom had wanted the store kept under one local hand until you were ready to talk about long-term decisions. I told her I wouldn't sign anything without seeing full books. She got cold. Then suddenly she told me I didn't understand what it meant to be the one who stayed. There it was again. The one who stayed. Daniel let out a humorless breath. I thought it was sibling resentment mixed with grief. You know how she can get when she feels like she's carrying more. But now that you're saying this, what did the packet say? I still have the email somewhere. Hold on. I heard keyboard sounds. Then a curse. Then more typing. Okay, found it. He read from the email. Dan, attached is the management streamlining agreement Ruth wanted drafted before things get messier. Dad can't handle this stuff right now, and frankly, neither can you from Portland. This just keeps things clean. The store has to move fast if we're going to survive the winter. If you drag your feet, you're effectively voting to sink what Mom built. A Ruth wanted drafted. I almost laughed from the sheer audacity of it. Ruth never wanted it, I said. That's what I'm guessing. Daniel paused. There was also a paragraph about you maybe stepping back due to fatigue and emotional instability after Mom. My jaw clenched. Did you sign? No. Why not? Because the attachment looked wrong. I stopped pacing. Wrong how? Too polished. Daniel had always noticed presentation before content. He worked in product design and distrusted any document that tried too hard to feel harmless. The first page was full of soft words. Transitional oversight, family continuity, compassionate efficiency. It felt like a brochure for control. So I had a friend in legal glance at it. She said never sign anything with this many adjectives and this few numbers. That almost got a real laugh out of me. Almost. Did Amelia know you showed it to someone? Yes, she lost it. Said I was treating her like a thief. Said Mom trusted her because she was the one willing to stay and do the ugly work while I got to be geographically noble. Geographically noble. That was exactly Amelia's style. She could weaponize a phrase so neatly it took a second to realize you had been cut. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. Silence, longer this time. Then Daniel said, because I thought you chose her. That landed hard. He kept going. Dad, every time I called the first year after Mom died, you sounded half absent. Amelia was always nearby, always handling things, always saying the store was one bad month from disaster. Whenever I pushed, you would get quiet and say, your sister is doing what she can. After a while, it felt like if I kept prying, I'd just be the son who fled and then came back to criticize the daughter doing the actual work. I sat back down slowly. I'm sorry. No, he said. I'm sorry too. I should have pushed harder. But there's more. Of course there was. 6 months ago, he said, Amelia asked if I'd ever consider selling my share outright if the store had to be restructured. She made it sound hypothetical. I told her not without independent valuation and not while you were alive. She said that might not matter long term if your health kept trending the way it was. I gripped the edge of the table. Trending, as if I were a weather pattern, not a man. What did you say? I told her my health was between me and my doctor, and her concern sounded financially selective. She hung up on me. I looked toward the hallway where Lena's framed photo sat above the sideboard. Her smile in that picture was one of the reasons I had married her. No performance, no angle, just delight. What else, Dan? He hesitated. Mom called me 3 weeks before she died. Amelia was out picking up Eli. It was the last real private conversation I had with her. She sounded tired, not scared exactly, careful. She asked me a strange question. She asked if I thought Amelia ever confused devotion with entitlement. I closed my eyes. What did you say? I said yes, sometimes. Why? Because Mom told me if Amelia ever came to me using guilt and urgency in the same sentence, I should ask for paper and assume I was late to the problem. I opened my eyes again. She said that. Yes. I sat there for a long time holding the phone while Daniel breathed quietly on the other end. The late to the problem part hurt worst, because it was true. I was late, very late, and it had taken a banker, an old lawyer, an elderly accountant, and my son in Oregon to show me what my wife had tried to say before she died. Then Daniel said, "There's one other thing. Go ahead." Mom told me she moved something out of the store office in her last month. Something too easy to take if the wrong person starts cleaning too early. I didn't ask what. She just laughed weakly and said, "If it matters, Thomas will eventually remember where I hide things when I want them safe from optimism." That sounded so much like Lena, I nearly broke again. Optimism was what she called my habit of assuming people meant well until they proved otherwise. She used to say, "You are not naive, Thomas. You just overinvest in optimistic interpretations. If it matters, Thomas will eventually remember." There was only one place that sentence pointed, the apartment above the store. Not the old reading loft customers could see. The small private apartment tucked above the rear office with windows over the alley. Lena used it for quiet inventory weekends, manuscript edits, and once in a while when a snowstorm made staying downtown easier than driving home. After she got sick, Amelia told me she had boxed everything up there and left the space mostly unused because climbing the stairs upset her too much. Climbing the stairs upset her too much. Another sentence I had accepted because grief makes even sensible questions feel cruel. "Dad?" Daniel said. "You there?" "Yes." "I think you need to get into that apartment," he said. So did I. I slept maybe 2 hours that night, and none of them in a row. At 6:10 I was in my kitchen with coffee that tasted like burned cardboard and a pad of paper full of names, dates, arrows, and phrases I never wanted to hear again. By 8, Ruth was at my table with a canvas tote and a face that said she had already decided the day would get worse. I told her about Daniel. She did not interrupt. Then she said, "The apartment above the store needs to be seen before Amelia realizes we're no longer just suspicious." She was right. Again. We chose Monday morning because Amelia always did supplier calls in the cafe from 9 to 10 while Marisol handled the front and Evan unloaded shipments through the rear alley. Routine protects bad systems. If you understand the routine, you can move through the seams. At 9:23, Ruth parked behind the bakery across Willow Street and handed me a key. "Where did you get that?" "Lena gave it to me 6 years ago," she said. "Told me not to use it unless 2 things happened at once. She died, and somebody started lying to you with authority." I stared at the brass key in my palm. "You could have mentioned this sooner." "I was enjoying the illusion that maybe you'd eventually remember on your own," she said dryly. "But apparently your optimism remains hard to kill." The alley behind Hawthorne Books smelled like cardboard, coffee grounds, and old brick after rain. Evan was at the loading door with 2 boxes of children's hardcovers on a dolly. He nodded at me and said, "Morning." Mr. Hawthorne, like nothing in the world, was wrong. I nodded back, then waited until he pushed inside. The staircase to the apartment was tucked behind a heavy stockroom door at the back of the building. Lena used to call it the honest staircase because nobody climbed it unless they actually had work to do. I had not climbed it in over 2 years. The steps still creaked at the 4th and 10th risers. The landing window still had the same stubborn brass latch. The air still smelled faintly of dust, paper, and whatever brand of cedar sachet Lena used to hide in drawers. At the top, the apartment door stood painted cream with a tiny old brass knocker shaped like an owl. Lena bought it from an antique market in Vermont 20 years earlier and said any door guarded by an owl deserved better secrets than the average house. I put the key in, turned it, and felt my chest tighten when the lock gave easily. Inside, the apartment looked less abandoned than paused. That was the first thing that unsettled me. Amelia had said she boxed everything. She had not, or not fully. The small galley kitchen still held 2 blue mugs on the shelf. A jar of black tea sat beside the kettle. Lena's old throw blanket remained folded over the sofa arm. A stack of manuscript pages sat on the writing desk by the window with a smooth river stone holding them in place. Not random clutter, chosen stillness. Like someone had decided the room should stay emotionally available but materially untouched. Ruth moved slowly through the space, not touching much at first. I went to the desk. The manuscript pages were from Lena's unfinished essay collection. Not the children's books, a non-fiction set of reflections she never got to shape for publication. On the top page, in her handwriting, were 4 words, "Not for the trust file." I looked up sharply. Ruth. She was already standing by the bookshelf on the far wall. Not a store shelf, a real one. Home books, cookbooks, travel memoirs. A chipped ceramic cat Lena's mother had given us the year Daniel was born. Ruth pulled out 1 volume, then another, then a third. "What are you doing?" "Your wife did not hide things in safes unless she needed steel," Ruth said. "Mostly she hid them where a rushed person would straighten, not search." She slid a hardback travel book halfway out, then pushed inward on the empty space behind the row. A click. I actually felt my stomach drop. The shelf released a narrow inner panel no wider than a legal envelope. Behind it sat a green document box, forest green, metal latches. A little dent near the corner where I once dropped it on the garage floor in 2009. I knew that box. Lena used to keep tax backups in it years earlier, before she decided filing cabinets were for optimists and steel was for women who had dealt with publishers. I lifted it out with both hands. It was heavier than paper alone should have been. On top, taped cleanly under the handle, was another note. Thomas, if Amelia has already turned you into a funding source by the time you open this, swear first that you will read before you rage. Lena Ruth made a noise that was almost a laugh. Almost. Can you do that? She asked. Read before I rage. No promises. The box held 3 binders, 2 sealed envelopes, and a ledger. Not digital printouts. A ledger. Cream pages, blue ink, my wife's handwriting. I opened to the first marked tab. Store true. That was what she had labeled it. Inside were monthly summaries in plain English. Inventory, event revenue, royalties, reserve use, payroll, projected maintenance. Not dramatic, not secretive, just reality. The last fully updated month was one before her death. Healthy but tight, seasonal, manageable. Exactly the sort of business Lena had always run. I flipped forward and found later pages added in a different hand. Not hers, Harold's, then notes from Ruth, then no notes at all. The second binder was labeled What She Must Not Control Alone. That one was harder to open. Inside, trust language excerpts, authorization reminders, name references, and a page titled If Amelia Pushes for Simplification. Bullet points. Ask who benefits. Ask where royalties post. Ask to see payroll. Ask whether Daniel has seen the same paper. Ask why urgency always arrives before a holiday. Ask whether kindness and transparency are still occurring together. My wife had written anti-deception questions for me as if I were a student she knew would avoid the exam until the semester nearly ended. I sat on the sofa and put a hand over my mouth. Ruth said nothing. That was mercy. Then I opened the ledger. The first pages were ordinary enough. Store expenses, notes, receipts, projected school orders, author dinner costs, volunteer stipends. Then, about 18 months after Lena's death, the ink changed. A different pen. Still Lena's ledger. Now recording things she could not verify, only suspect. A line in the margin, A says reserve transfer needed for tax hold but will not show source docs. Another asked for payroll review, received tears. Another tried to reach Thomas directly, letter returned. Another, if she starts saying for his peace of mind, assume control issue, not compassion. The room had gone completely still around me. My wife had not just feared Amelia in theory. She had begun documenting the problem before she ran out of time. Ruth picked up one of the sealed envelopes. It was marked for Daniel, if he ever thinks distance makes him innocent. She raised an eyebrow. She did not waste labels. I almost smiled again. Almost. The other envelope was simpler. For the day she calls herself the one who saved it. That one I knew was for Amelia. I picked it up, felt the thickness inside. 1 or 2 pages maybe, no more. What if it's nothing, I said. Ruth looked at me. Your wife did not write theatrical notes to say nothing. I set the envelope down again. Then she found the final thing in the green box, a manila folder stamped in red, Aurora paperwork. What's Aurora? I asked. Ruth had already gone slightly pale. Project code, she said. I think that was the reissue deal. Inside were letters of intent from a major children's publisher, draft marketing schedules, projected numbers, and a memo from Lena to herself. If Aurora closes, do not announce until the trust amendment is signed. A needs structure before scale. Success will not make her gentler. I leaned back against the sofa and shut my eyes. That was the whole story in one sentence. Success will not make her gentler. My wife saw that if Amelia got bigger money before tighter rules, it would not soothe her. It would simply give her better tools. Then Ruth made the finding that changed strategy completely. At the bottom of the Aurora folder sat a notarized side letter, signed by Lena, acknowledged by counsel, flagged for trigger use only. Ruth read it, then handed it to me. If the acting manager of Hawthorne Books diverts estate-linked royalties, conceals trust summaries from the life overseer, or attempts to induce sale of the building through misrepresentation of store solvency, all managerial authority is immediately void and a forfeiture review begins. Any family member who knowingly benefits from such concealment may also forfeit discretionary inheritance enhancements reserved under Schedule C. I looked up. Schedule C. Ruth nodded. Your wife left discretionary enhancements to both children. Not equal, but substantial. Daniel gets one, Amelia gets another, unless she triggers forfeiture through fraud or concealment. Then her enhancement dissolves and reverts to educational endowment use. Educational endowment. I stared at the page. How much is Schedule C worth? Ruth hesitated, which told me the number was ugly. Thomas, depending on valuations and timing, a little over 1.8 million. The apartment seemed to tilt. Amelia had not just been siphoning money. She had been gambling with her own future inheritance. And because she did not know exactly what triggers Lena had embedded in the trust, she may have already destroyed the thing she was trying to pre-spend in her head. That is another truth about predatory entitlement. It almost always eats its own reward on the way. I stood up too fast and moved to the window. From there I could see the alley roofline, a sliver of Willow Street, and the front of the Arts Center across the road where Lena used to host joint holiday readings. Ruth's voice came from behind me. You understand what this means? Yes. Say it anyway. It means if Amelia has been trying to sell the store, redirect the royalties, and use my guilt to keep me funding the gap while she builds a bigger public image, she's already standing on the trapdoor your wife built. Exactly. I turned back. And if she knows none of that, then she's walking toward her own financial cliff in expensive boots and good lighting. I looked at the green box again, at the ledger, at Lena's notes, at the sealed envelope for Amelia. We have enough now? I asked. Ruth considered that carefully. Enough to confront? Yes. Enough to win cleanly if she lies hard? Not yet. We still need proof of what she did with the diverted money, confirmation of what she told vendors and staff, and whether she has made any move towards sale or collateralization of the building. Collateralization. Mortgage against it. Yes. I thought about the expensive decor receipt, the consultant payroll, the donor breakfast, the new display tables, the glossy smile, the phrase, those who stay behind. Then I thought of one more thing. If she thinks I'm only useful when guilty, what happens when she realizes I'm asking better questions? Ruth's face stayed still. Then she'll stop asking softly. Ruth was right. Amelia stopped asking softly on Tuesday. Up until then, every request had worn either embarrassment or fatigue. Those were her reliable costumes. But by Tuesday afternoon, the line had changed. Dad, I need you to come by the store before close. We have to discuss some restructuring options before they become emergencies. Restructuring options. There are phrases that only sound professional if you have not yet translated them into danger. I called Ruth immediately. She told me to go. She also told me to wear the Wire app on my phone, keep it recording in my coat pocket, and for the love of Lena, not to improvise speeches. I arrived at 5:12. The store was mostly empty. Rain had started again. Gray light on the windows. The kind of evening where books and coffee usually made the place feel warm. Not that day. Amelia was waiting in the back office with 2 mugs already poured and a folder on the desk. That alone told me plenty. Prepared conversation, timed, paper present, tone selected. Dad, thanks for coming, of course. I sat. She did not. She stayed standing for a beat longer than necessary, which meant she wanted the room off balance before we began. I've been thinking a lot about the future, she said. That is almost always the opening line for people who mean your future, not theirs, has become useful to rearrange. Have you? Yes, and I'm worried. About what? You there it was, softly delivered, preloaded with concern, ready to turn any pushback into proof of instability. I picked up my mug and said nothing. She finally sat down, folded her hands, looked at me like a daughter preparing to say the brave thing nobody wants to hear. Dad, you're working too much. The shop is taking everything out of you. You look tired all the time. And with the store still so volatile, I think we need to simplify before winter turns ugly. Simplify. Volatile. Ugly. The same old machine, just louder. What kind of simplify? She slid the folder toward me. Inside was a proposal packet, formatted beautifully. Cream paper, blue tabs. A letterhead from a consultancy I did not recognize. Willow Ridge Cultural Advisory. Same family of words, different suit. What's this? A transition plan, she said, temporary, just to protect the store and reduce your stress. We can centralize oversight, line up a strategic lender if needed, maybe even partner with a regional group for event expansion so the pressure stops living on our backs. Our backs. I turned pages slowly. Projected operating support, strategic line of credit, temporary executive authority, advisory co-signature, real estate optimization language. Then I hit the page she thought would be hidden enough inside the packet to arrive late. Exploratory asset sale threshold. I looked up. Sale. She gave a tiny exhale, the one she used when pretending to say something painful for my own good, only if absolutely necessary, and not the whole business, maybe partial building rights, maybe a long lease, maybe air rights. There are options. We have to stop thinking emotionally if we want to protect what Mom built. That line almost got me. Almost. Because my wife had said nearly the opposite in writing. Protection without emotion had never been her plan. Protection with structure had. Who wrote this? The advisory firm. What advisory firm? She named a man. Paul Mercer. A local cultural strategist. I knew instantly it was nonsense. Not because I had heard of him. Because Amelia's lies were beginning to leave the soft family circle and move into the broader fake business world people invent when they need invisible experts. Can I take this and read it? Her eyes shifted. Tiny. Quick. Then back. It really needs a fast answer. Why? Because timing matters. Funny, I said. That seems to be everybody's favorite word lately. She blinked. What do you mean? Nothing. Just seems like every time paper appears, I'm told not to read it too long. That landed. Not fully, but enough. She changed tactics. Dad, please don't do that thing where you get suspicious because you're tired. I am trying to help you. I am trying to keep this family from losing the last thing Mom left us. That sentence would have worked a week earlier. Now all I heard was pressure wrapped in my wife's memory. I closed the folder and stood. I'll read it. Her voice sharpened. Just a little. Tonight. I looked at her. No. Silence. Then she stood too. You don't understand. She said, there are deadlines attached. For what? For opportunities. For lender windows. For what, Amelia? For keeping this place from becoming sentimental real estate and nothing else. That line showed her hand. She was angry now. Not enough to break, enough to slip. Sentimental real estate. The language of somebody already picturing the asset after the story has been drained out of it. I took the folder with me. She followed me to the door, not touching, not shouting. Just close enough to make the hallway feel occupied. At the threshold, she said something that told me the mask was cracking faster than I had expected. Mom trusted me to do what was necessary when you couldn't. I turned back slowly. Is that what you call it? Her face hardened fully for the first time in years. What do you call it? I looked at her for a long second and said the calmest, true thing I had. I call it interesting that everything becomes urgent the moment I start asking questions. Then I left. In the truck, I sat with the folder in my lap and listened to my own breathing for 30 seconds before calling Ruth. That was fast, she said. She's moving. Good. Bring it here. Willow Ridge Cultural Advisory turned out to be exactly the kind of advisory firm a liar deserves. Not fake in the sense of non-existent. Worse. Real enough to invoice. Small enough to hide. Connected enough to move paper where ordinary people stop looking. By 9 that night, Ruth had already found the registration. Willow Ridge Cultural Advisory was a consulting LLC formed 18 months earlier by Paul Mercer. Yes. But the mailing address tied back to a suite shared by 2 other entities. One of them was the same management service Amelia used when she created Willow Street Cultural Holdings. The other was tied to a commercial broker who specialized in mixed-use downtown properties. Property broker. There it was. The sales smell. Not sentimental, not family, asset. Ruth circled one line in red. This is not a panic response, she said. This is the next stage. What next stage? They've already spent and positioned enough that now they need a bigger move. Credit line, lease structure, partial sale. Maybe outright sale if they can convince you the store can't survive without it. Once the building shifts, the rest gets easier to rationalize. I thought about the clause in Lena's trust. Any family member who knowingly benefits from attempted sale through misrepresentation of store solvency may forfeit discretionary inheritance enhancements. She's already on the trapdoor, I said. Yes, but people rarely stop walking just because the floor starts speaking. The next morning, Ruth sent me to see Marisol. Not formally, not in some lawyerly way, just coffee at a diner before her shift because, as Ruth put it, employees know more than books and less than they think they're allowed to say. Marisol Ortega was 29, sharp eyeliner, faster smile than I expected, hands rough from cafe work and inventory lifting. Lena hired her 5 years earlier after she left a restaurant manager job and wanted something less soul-killing. We met at a booth in Dorsey's Diner at 7:30. She looked nervous before I even sat down. Mr. Hawthorne, am I in trouble? No. Did Amelia tell you that? Not exactly. But she said there's been a lot of stress around finances lately, and some people don't always understand the pressure she's under. That was Amelia already preceding the room, always one step ahead on narrative. I hated it. You're not in trouble, I said. I just need honesty. About the store, about how things actually are. Marisol looked down at her coffee. Are you asking as her dad or as Lena's husband? That question told me more about the store than any statement could. As Lena's husband, I said. She nodded once, then exhaled. The store is not failing. I kept my face still. Tell me anyway. She glanced toward the window before continuing. The old fear of workplace conversation. The fear of being the first honest person in a system built on implied silence. The store's been doing well for a while, she said. Not huge money every month. We're still a bookstore, but the cafe helps. The school bundles help. The author nights are strong. Online sales grew after Amelia hired the social team. Last fall was the best quarter since I started here. Best quarter. I let that sit. Then why all the panic? Marisol gave a small shrug because Amelia likes to talk like disaster is always one invoice away. That way people don't push back when she changes things. What things? Vendor switches, private dinners, consultant invoices, staff roles, event budgets. She started saying yes to expensive-looking things because the store had to feel larger than it was if it wanted donors and partnerships. At first it worked. Then she got used to the feeling. The feeling. That was good. That was specific. That was human. Did she ever mention selling? Not directly. But she's been talking for months about unlocking the real value of the building. She says bookstores survive now by treating location like leverage, not just space. There it was again. Not books, not readers. Location. Did Lena ever talk like that? Marisol actually laughed. No. Lena used to say if the building becomes more important than what happens inside it, you're just decorating the wrong kind of greed. That sentence hurt because I could hear Lena saying it exactly. I asked one more question. Do staff know the store gets royalties from Lena's books? Marisol frowned. Of course. Amelia talks about it sometimes. Says it's beautiful how even after death, her mother's work still supports the dream. Supports the dream. I nearly put my head in my hands right there in the booth, because she had not even hidden the existence of the royalties from everyone. She had simply hidden their destination from me. Do you know where those royalties go? Marisol shook her head. No, books aren't my lane. But I do know one thing. She leaned forward. When those deposits hit, Amelia gets generous. That's when we get flowers, new display props, photographer hours, tasting menus for events, all that stuff she calls present spending. Present spending. I wrote it down in my head instantly. Then she added the thing that mattered even more. And every time she does it, she says the same line. Money only matters if people can see where it went. That was not bookkeeping. That was branding. My daughter had been laundering inheritance into atmosphere and calling it stewardship. After Marisol left, I sat alone for another 10 minutes. Then I called Ruth and said 2 words. She's expanding. Ruth answered with 2 of her own. Of course. By Wednesday afternoon, the shape of it was clearer. Amelia had not just diverted the royalties. She had built a whole public image around being the suffering curator of a cultural institution. She had spent enough to make the store feel aspirational, then used that aspirational image to attract more donors, more partnerships, more goodwill, and more emotional insulation against scrutiny. That is the thing about certain kinds of fraud in adult family stories. They rarely begin with stealing because stealing is emotionally simple. They begin with self-storytelling. I deserve this. I built this. No one sees what I sacrifice. I stayed. I carried. I held it all together. At some point, the money simply starts obeying the story. Wednesday night, Daniel sent me the email packet Amelia once tried to get him to sign. 31 pages. Beautifully formatted. Nasty in the middle. Transitional management authority. Building optimization triggers. Long-term simplification pathways. Emotional burden reduction for senior family members. Succession-aligned stewardship. All these polite phrases hiding the same truth. Amelia wanted full operational control, then real estate leverage, and eventually freedom to convert the store into whatever made the numbers look richest while still hanging Lena's name in the front window. I sat with those papers until midnight, then found the line that made me stand up so fast the chair tipped over. In the event the life overseer becomes unable or unwilling to exercise active review due to grief, age-related fatigue, or emotional incapacity, the acting manager may secure temporary external guidance toward efficient disposition strategies. Efficient disposition strategies. Sale, lease, redevelopment, whatever paid best while sounding least ugly. My own daughter had been trying to build legal language around my exhaustion. That was the moment anger finally overtook shame. Not clean rage. Old man rage. Slow, humiliating, hot. The kind that makes your teeth ache because it arrives with memory attached. I remembered Amelia at 6 on the front step crying because Daniel would not let her hold the kite spool. I remembered her at 11, refusing to let a classmate go home without lunch money because, in her words, it's embarrassing to be hungry where people can see. I remembered her at 19 helping Lena carry cartons after a flood in the rear stockroom. I remembered all the ways love had made cruelty feel impossible to imagine. And then I looked at the sentence she had nearly gotten Daniel to sign and understood something I should have understood years ago. People do not become predators by losing every good trait. They become dangerous by persuading themselves their suffering has earned them the right to reorganize everyone else's reality. Thursday morning brought the first direct threat. Amelia called at 8:06, too early for casual conversation, too controlled for panic. Dad, I need those advisory papers back today. Still reading, I said. They're time sensitive. Everything seems time sensitive lately. Silence. Then I'm serious. So am I. She changed tone. Are you talking to Ruth? That got my full attention. Why? Because she's been a bad influence on you before, she said. Mom trusted her too much, and Ruth always makes everything legal before it has to be. Everything legal before it has to be. That is what guilty people say when they sense law walking toward them. I looked out my kitchen window at the little machine shop behind the house, the one I had refinanced because my daughter told me the bookstore was one invoice from drowning. Amelia, I said, if the store needs help, paper should not scare you. Then she said the sentence that told me she was no longer managing me as a father. She was evaluating me as a problem. I don't think you're thinking clearly right now. There it was. Age, fatigue, instability. She was reaching for the script. Maybe not, I said, but I'm reading more clearly than I have in years. Then I hung up. Ruth called 12 minutes later. How did she sound? Like concern had put on a suit and started measuring the windows. Good. Keep that exact phrase. She's moving toward capacity language. We need her to show it, but not fully yet. What do you mean fully? I mean, the next step for people like Amelia is to float a suggestion. You're tired, you're overwhelmed. Maybe Daniel can help. Maybe a neutral financial helper should step in. Maybe the documents can wait until you're steadier. When those suggestions stop working, the paper gets uglier. What kind of ugly? The kind with signatures. I sat down again. Ruth. Yes. How long did Lena know? She was quiet for a second, long enough to be sad before she was scared. That answer stayed with me all day. Sad before scared. Because it meant my wife had watched our daughter tilt toward something hard and hoped love and structure would correct it. When they did not, she had tightened paper and prayed the rest would never be needed. By Thursday evening, Dennis found the final financial connection we needed before moving. It came through the florist invoice from Amelia's desk. the one for the donor reception. The event had been billed not to Hawthorne Books, but to Willow Street Cultural Holdings. Same diversion entity, same account family, same pool. Which meant Amelia was not only rerouting the royalties there, she was using the diversion company as a lifestyle and image buffer outside the clean bookstore books. Money only matters if people can see where it went. Yes. And she had decided people should see flowers, photographers, elegant receptions, and a daughter carrying the cultural torch. What they were not supposed to see was the hand in the till. By Friday morning, Ruth and Dana Morrow were in the same room together for the first time. The air between them felt like sharpened paper. Dana had read enough to understand immediately. "This is elder exploitation wearing bereavement drag," she said, dropping the advisory packet on my kitchen table. "Add diversion, trust concealment, potential male interference, and attempted coercive authority restructuring, and your daughter is one good lie away from a criminal math problem." I looked at her. "One good lie away?" She glanced at me over the top of the packet. "Thomas, she has already told several. What I mean is the next documented move toward control might let us convert a family disaster into a prosecutable scheme." Prosecutable scheme. There are sentences a man never imagines hearing about his own daughter. That was one of them. "So what do we need?" I asked. Dana tapped the advisory packet. "Intent, movement, and if we can get it, her saying out loud what the money and the building really mean to her." That is when Ruth opened Lena's sealed envelope for Amelia. Not because sentiment mattered, because strategy did. Inside was a 2-page handwritten letter. No screaming, no theatrical curse, no maternal condemnation. That would not have been Lena's way. Instead, it was precise, merciless, and somehow sadder for being so calm. "Amelia, if you are reading this because the trust has already shifted against you, then the first thing you will feel is injustice. Please sit with that feeling before you speak. You have always mistaken your proximity for innocence. You stayed, that is true. You also counted your staying with a private arithmetic I did not trust even when you were a girl. You believe effort creates moral ownership. Sometimes it does. Often it only creates fatigue. And fatigue, left unattended, can become hunger. If you have reached the point where paper had to stop you, then this is what I want you to know. I saw you. Not just your help, not just your competence, your resentment too, your habit of turning burden into a quiet claim on whatever comes next. I loved you enough to see it. I loved you enough not to flatter it. If you took what was not yours because you believed staying near me made you the rightful center of every inheritance, then you were not protecting my work. You were feeding on it. You may tell yourself your father would have given you anything if asked. That is true. Which is exactly why asking honestly was the only moral path left open to you. Lena, by the time Ruth finished reading, the room had gone perfectly still. Then Dana said, almost under her breath, "Your wife had a spine like courthouse stone." "Yes," I said, "she did." And for the first time since the bank, I felt something close to steadiness. Not because this was getting easier, because for the first time the truth did not belong only to my own hurt. It belonged to paper, dates, witnesses, and the dead woman who had loved all of us enough to plan against the one most likely to turn love into leverage. That afternoon, we set the trap. The trap had to look like relief. That was Dana's phrase. Not pressure, not accusation, relief. If we pushed Amelia openly, she would lawyer up, hide behind ambiguity, and start claiming she had been protecting a grieving father from harsh numbers. If we went to the bookstore with badges too early, she would become the daughter ambushed by outsiders, because she dared to keep her mother's dream alive. In other words, she would use the same stolen narrative one last time and force us to burn weeks proving what she already knew. So we had to make her think the thing she wanted most was finally becoming possible. The event she already had scheduled for Saturday night gave us the opening. Community partner reception, private collector preview, quiet arts council people, a local feature writer, 2 education donors, 3 women from the literary guild, 1 commercial broker, although the public guest list hid him under his firm's cultural philanthropy division. That detail came from Dana. She had cross-checked the floral invoice, the guest names, the advisory packet, and Willow Ridge's consultant traces. The broker's actual specialty was not culture. It was urban mixed-use repositioning. Translated into English, he helped turn meaningful old places into expensive bland ones with coffee names. If Amelia had been preparing a sale pathway, this reception was not just a thank you event. It was courtship. We spent all Friday building the shape of what she would believe. First, I returned the advisory packet by messenger with a short note in my handwriting. "Read, want to discuss in person. Maybe timing matters more than I liked admitting. Saturday before your event, Dad, no accusation. No references to Ruth. Just enough softening to taste hopeful." Amelia replied 46 minutes later, "Of course, knew you'd see the bigger picture. Come by at 4? Love you. Knew you'd see the bigger picture." That line bothered Dana more than it bothered me. Why? Because she's already framing agreement as intelligence, Dana said. That means if you hesitate tomorrow, she'll turn hesitation into weakness or emotional confusion. Be ready for that. Second, Dennis prepared a simple summary sheet showing me the real known revenue against the false hardship claims. Not to confront with, to hold me steady when she started performing. Third, Ruth made me rehearse. Not words, posture. Sit when offered. Do not pace, do not take the bait when she invokes Lena. If she says your memory is slipping, do not defend your mind. Ask for numbers. If she says the store cannot survive, ask which revenue stream. If she tries to move too fast, ask what changed this week. And above all else, remember you are not there to win the argument. You are there to let greed explain itself in complete sentences. Saturday arrived cold and bright, the kind of autumn day that makes every brick building in town look more honest than it is. At 3:30, I parked around the corner from Hawthorne Books and sat in the truck with the heater off because my body was too hot already. Dana sat in the passenger seat, not in a lawyer suit but in a navy coat and pearl earrings. The kind of polished middle-aged look that disappears into literary donor events easily. Across the street, Aaron Bell sat in a catering van with tech equipment and a bored expression so convincing I almost believed he was there to unload canapé trays. Two plainclothes detectives mingled as municipal arts office staff. Ruth had a legitimate invitation because nobody in that town ever stopped inviting Ruth to events they half feared she might sue them over one day. And me, I was just the grieving husband and tired father, the money man with feelings, the easiest mark in the room. That role came naturally now, too naturally. I went in at 3:58. The store looked beautiful. I hated it for that. Candles in hurricane glass on the display tables, small bronze plaques near certain first editions, fresh flowers on the front counter, new printed cards describing Lena Hawthorne's influence on local literacy. The cafe corner transformed into a wine station with linen napkins and 3 cheeses nobody should ever have bought while asking me for emergency winter cash. Amelia met me at the back office door, not the front. That mattered. Public beauty out front, real business in back. Dad, I'm glad you came. You knew I would? She smiled. Eventually, another one of those words, built to flatter and accuse at the same time. She led me into the office. This time, not just coffee on the desk. There was also a leather portfolio, 2 glasses of water, and 3 extra chairs. 3 extra chairs. I looked at them and said nothing. Amelia followed my eyes and said lightly, I thought it might help if Paul joined for a few minutes, just to explain the structure options more clearly, and maybe someone from Willow Ridge who can answer the property side if we get that far. Property side. There it was again. No more hiding sale language behind poetry. The first person in was Paul Mercer, mid-40s, good haircut, brown shoes too new, the kind of smile consultants develop when they need to look harmless while charging for other people's impatience. Thomas, he said, hand out. I've heard so much about your support for this remarkable place. I did not stand to shake his hand, I just nodded at the chair. Sit. That set a tone. Good. He sat. Next came Richard Bales from Wainwright Urban Advisory. Tall, silver hair, perfect glasses, perfect tie. The exact face gentrification would wear if it took human form. He called the bookstore a legacy parcel before we had even been seated for 2 full minutes. Legacy parcel. I wrote that phrase down in my head like it was a fingerprint. And finally, because greed likes audiences, Amelia invited in one more person. Vera Coleman from the local Arts Foundation. Vera adored Lena, always had, helped organize readings, cried at the funeral, now sat down smiling warmly at me, thinking she was witnessing a Bramley strategy session to preserve culture. That was Amelia's real gift, not lying. Curating witnesses. She began the meeting herself. Dad, before the event starts, I wanted us all in one room because the store has reached a point where sentiment can either help or hurt depending on how honest we're willing to be. Sentiment. Again. Every time she needed to make compassion sound like a financial liability, she used that word. I folded my hands on the desk and looked at her. Be honest then. Paul Mercer cleared his throat and opened a glossy packet. The long and short, Mr. Hawthorne, is that Hawthorne Books has tremendous emotional value and respectable local brand capital, but under-leveraged physical and licensing assets. Emotional value, brand capital, under-leveraged physical and licensing assets. A man can say something rotten in such clean language that it takes a second to smell it. Go on, I said. He nodded, encouraged. With the right restructuring, this property could become something larger. A mixed-model literary and hospitality concept, expanded event footprint, ground floor retail and cafe, upper floor programming space, possibly luxury short-term literary residency upstairs if zoning allows. And if a full modernization partnership is secured, the Hawthorne name could scale regionally. My wife ran a bookstore, not a biotech startup. Richard Bales leaned in then, sensing the room would tolerate the smell of money now. There is significant unrealized value in the building itself, he said. Prime downtown frontage, flexible air rights, strong walkability score. The community narrative is already there. Frankly, Mr. Hawthorne, your late wife built the perfect story. It simply needs to be unlocked. I have never forgotten that sentence. Your late wife built the perfect story. It simply needs to be unlocked. Story, unlocked. The language of men who treat grief like branding material. Vera, bless her confused soul, smiled and said, "Well, if this keeps Lena's influence alive, I can see why it's exciting." Amelia nodded. "Just enough. Not too much. Always careful to let other people speak the nice version first." That was when I asked the question Dana wanted. What changed this week? All four of them looked at me. I repeated it. If the store was surviving last month and the month before that, what changed this week that makes air rights and mixed-use strategy suddenly urgent? Paul answered first. Nothing dramatic. This is about timing opportunity before market shifts. That is not a number, I said. Silence. Then Amelia jumped in. Dad, it's not one number. It's momentum. It's donor interest. It's the reality that we can't keep thinking like a small family shop if we want the store to survive the next decade. The store, I said slowly. Or your version of it. That landed. Small change in her eyes. Good. Richard Bales tried again. Mr. Hawthorne, with respect, sometimes legacy preservation requires difficult choices. A building can either remain emotionally meaningful to a shrinking audience or become financially resilient for a broader one. Financially resilient for a broader one. I looked at him. How much is the building worth to you? He smiled, almost. That depends on the structure. Try again. Paul cut in then, aiming for softer ground. What Richard means is that if the family chooses a strategic partnership, no, I said. I asked what the building is worth to him. Silence again. Then Richard gave me the first honest number in the room. In current conditions, with redevelopment flexibility and licensing narrative attached, the parcel and building could support a valuation between 2.9 and 3.4 million depending on easements and control. There it was, finally. Not sentiment, not stewardship. Not stress on Amelia, the real scent under the room. $3 million? Vera looked surprised, genuinely. For the first time in the whole meeting, she stopped performing solidarity and started understanding scale. Amelia saw it too and moved fast. That's not why we're here, she said. We're here because if we don't move, we risk losing what Mom built in smaller pieces and uglier ways. That was the moment Dana later told me the lie had started overheating. Because once a liar sees a neutral witness beginning to understand the actual money, they start pulling the original emotional frame harder. I looked at Amelia. Really looked. How much of Mom's royalties have you redirected through Willow Street Cultural Holdings? She went completely still, not visibly to a stranger, to me, to Ruth maybe, to anybody who had spent 30 years watching her choose an answer. What are you talking about? I kept my voice flat. How much of Mom's royalties have you redirected through Willow Street Cultural Holdings? Vera turned toward Amelia slowly. Paul Mercer frowned. Richard Bales stopped pretending his role was cultural. The room had changed, all at once. Dad, Amelia said softly, I don't know what someone has put in your head. There it was, not denial. Influence. Always influence. I cut in. The bank flagged the transfers. Ruth has the trust. Harold Mencken has the books. Marisol knows the store hasn't been drowning. Daniel has the packet you wanted him to sign. So I'll ask one more time. How much? Paul shifted in his chair. Richard looked toward the door. Vera had gone pale. Amelia's face changed. Not fully, not yet. But the daughter mask slid half an inch and something sharper came through. This is not the place, she said. No, I said. You built this place for exactly this kind of conversation. You just thought the story would still be yours when it happened. That line hit. She stood up. Dad, you are confused and emotional, and if Ruth has been feeding you half-interpreted documents. There. Ruth, documents. Confused, emotional. The age script, the fatigue script, the instability script, exactly as predicted. I did not defend my mind. I followed the latter. Which revenue stream failed, Amelia? What? You told me the store was drowning. Which revenue stream failed? That's not how business pressure works. Which revenue stream? She looked at Paul, then at Richard, then back at me. Dad, please stop. No. Which revenue stream? Silence. Then she said the sentence that broke the room. I did what I had to do. Not I didn't do it. Not, you misunderstand. Not there were temporary adjustments. I did what I had to do. Vera actually set down her water glass, very carefully, like she was suddenly afraid of breaking something. Paul Mercer leaned back, not out of guilt, out of distance. Consultants are excellent at stepping half an inch away the moment the mess becomes obviously criminal. I asked the next question. Did you tell me Mom died broke because it was easier to get money from me if I thought I was saving her store? She shut her eyes for 1 second, opened them, and then, to my everlasting disgust, she decided honesty was less dangerous than looking cornered. You were easier to manage when you felt needed, she said. No one moved. No one spoke. My own daughter had just said the thing out loud. You were easier to manage when you felt needed. I looked at Vera. She looked sick. Paul Mercer stood up. I think I need to. Sit down, Dana said from the doorway. Every head turned. She had timed it beautifully. Not early enough to save anybody. Not late enough to lose the line. Navy coat off now. Badge visible. Voice controlled. No one is leaving until we get a few things straight. Behind her, Carver stepped in with 2 detectives. Aaron Bell appeared at the threshold with his boring caterer face gone at last. Ruth came in from the side office carrying the sealed envelope Lena had written for Amelia. And Vera Coleman, poor woman, whispered Lena's name like a prayer and leaned back in her chair. Amelia looked from Dana to me to Ruth to the detectives. Her first instinct was not guilt. It was outrage. You set me up. No, I said. Your mother did. Ruth laid the letter on the desk, unopened still. Amelia stared at the handwriting, and I watched something truly human cross her face for the first time in months. Not fear of arrest, recognition. She knew the script was not just over. It had been anticipated by the one person whose judgment mattered most, and whose death she had used as cover. Dana spoke crisply. Amelia Hawthorne, at this point you may want counsel. But before that happens, I need to be very clear. We have evidence of diverted trust-linked funds, concealed royalty transfers, attempted inducement of building disposition through misrepresentation of solvency, male interference concerns, and potential elder financial exploitation. So your next sentence matters. Paul Mercer said, I'm counsel adjacent only. I'm not criminal. Richard Bales muttered something about being invited under incomplete representations. Vera looked like she might actually faint, and Amelia laughed. Not warmly, not wildly, just one short, exhausted, hateful laugh. You all want this to be a simple theft, she said. Fine, it wasn't simple. Mom left a monument, not a business. Dad would have let the place fossilize in grief. Daniel lives 12 states away and sends good intentions by email. I am the one who stayed. I'm the one who did the ugly work. I'm the one who turned memory into momentum. So yes, I moved money. Yes, I used what was there. Because sentiment doesn't pay staff and dead women don't get to understand market shifts. That was the cleanest confession we got all day. It also told me something I had not quite admitted yet. Amelia no longer saw her mother as a person with instructions. She saw her as an asset story whose emotional value could be monetized if handled correctly. Dana asked, Did you knowingly conceal trust summaries from Thomas Hawthorne? Amelia looked at me instead of Dana. I protected him from numbers he was too fragile to carry. That was yes. Everyone in the room heard it. Did you knowingly redirect royalties into Willow Street Cultural Holdings without full disclosure to the life overseer? Again, she looked at me. I stabilized what he would have destabilized. Another yes dressed in righteousness. Did you solicit personal funds from him under the pretense that Hawthorne Books was in collapse? That one she answered with open contempt. Would he have given less if he thought he was helping a growth phase? Silence. And there it was. No justifications left worth polishing, only arithmetic. Paul Mercer quietly put both hands on the table where Dana could see them and said, For the record, I was engaged for repositioning consultation only and was not aware of trust restrictions. Richard Bales added something similar in his own slippery language. Vera Coleman started crying, not loudly, not because the law had arrived, because she had loved Lena and suddenly understood that half the speeches she had applauded for 2 years had been paid for with stolen grief. Amelia looked at her and said, Oh, please, don't do that. That told me everything left, even then, even cornered, even with police in the room. She still found other people's moral shock inconvenient. Dana nodded to Carver. He stepped forward. Amelia Hawthorne, based on the evidence before us and the statements made here today, you are being detained pending formal charge review. Please stand. Amelia did not move at first. Instead, she looked at me and said the thing I had always feared she might say if the room ever turned against her. I did this because someone had to. Not for money, not for stress, not even for the store, because someone had to. That is the sentence people use when they have committed years to a lie and need the lie to remain morally taller than the harm it caused. I stood slowly. No, I said. You did this because helping quietly wasn't enough. You needed to own what your mother built and be thanked for it while using my guilt to pay for the applause. Her face tightened. Finally. At last. Somewhere beneath entitlement, truth had found the nerve. Carver stepped in, took her wrist, turned her. Read writes, professional, clean, no drama the law did not require. As he guided her toward the door, she twisted once and said, You'll ruin the store doing this. Dana answered before I could, No, we're ruining your access to it. The room stayed silent long after she left. Then Vera looked at me with tears on her face and said, Thomas, I am so sorry. I nodded because I had no energy for grace right then. After the police took Amelia out the back entrance, Dana turned to Paul Mercer and Richard Bales. Both of you will preserve every communication, draft, invoice, and note tied to Hawthorne Books, Willow Street Cultural Holdings, and any advisory or real estate discussions involving this property. If I find out either of you deleted a single thing after leaving here, I will stop being civil in a hurry. That was when Paul finally looked scared. Good. The public part of the event never happened that night, not as planned. Customers were quietly turned away. Wine glasses disappeared. Flowers stayed where they were because no one had the heart to move them. And I stood in the middle of my wife's store while staff pretended to tidy around a crater. Ruth came beside me and put the unopened envelope for Amelia in my hand. What do I do with this? Read it when you can bear hearing your wife be right. Not tonight. No, she said. Not tonight. Then she added, almost softly, You did well. I looked at the front display, the velvet pumpkins, the candles, the cards describing Lena's legacy like it was a sponsorship tier. No, I said. Lena did well. I just finally stopped getting in her way. The morning after Amelia's arrest, the town woke up hungry. That is what towns do when scandal finally tears cleanly enough for daylight. They do not ask first whether anyone is well. They ask what happened, who knew, how long, and whether the beautiful thing they liked was ever real to begin with. By 8, 2 local stations had online headlines up. Community bookstore director detained in financial misconduct probe. Questions swirl around Hawthorne Books estate funds. By 9, the larger regional paper had gone farther. Family legacy or financial deception. Inside the shocking detention of a beloved bookstore heir. Beloved bookstore heir. Even the language of exposure still carried the shape of the lie. I shut the laptop and went to make coffee because if I kept reading, I was going to confuse public appetite with justice. The store stayed closed Monday. Dana insisted. Not because closure was legally necessary at that hour, because the building needed paper, locks, inventory review, and a pause long enough to separate Hawthorne Books from whatever people imagined Amelia had turned it into. By noon, Daniel was on a flight from Portland. That sentence alone still feels strange. My son had spent years at a distance, so normal it felt permanent. Then in 24 hours he became immediate again. Calls, texts, boarding updates, practical questions. Need anything from the airport? Do we have access to the apartment? What's the current status with child services? Is the building insured separately from inventory? Did Mom ever update the furnace warranty? That last one was so specifically Daniel it nearly made me cry. When he landed, he came straight to my house. No hotel, no awkward cafe, no long speech at the door. He just walked in carrying one duffel bag and hugged me so hard I had to brace against the hall table. He smelled like rain, airports, and the same cedar soap he'd used since college. For a second he was 10 again, and I was still a man who believed time mostly moved in one direction. Then he stepped back, looked at my face, and said, "You look awful. So do you. Good. Then maybe we're finally in the same century again." That was Daniel. When things hurt too much, he tried to angle humor under them instead of denying they were there. He sat at my kitchen table an hour later with Ruth, Dennis, and Dana. Not because we wanted to overwhelm him, because the case had grown larger than family and smaller than mercy at the same time. Everyone needed the same paper. Dana walked him through the known timeline, the trust, the diverted royalties, the donor event, the confession lines, the attempted sale structure, the possible elder exploitation counts, the need to preserve digital and paper evidence before Amelia's defense team started reframing every decision as pressured but benevolent management. Daniel listened quietly, hands folded, no interruptions. Only once did he look up sharply. When Dana mentioned the fake hospice burden. "What do you mean fake?" he asked. That was the part still not fully mapped. By then we knew the estate had no crushing medical ruin attached to it. We knew Amelia had told me there was. What we did not yet have was the mechanism. Dana laid out the possibilities. Inflated bill language, selective disclosure, delayed reimbursements framed as losses, or outright fabrication through copied templates. Ruth tapped the file stack beside her. "We'll know soon." That soon arrived the next day because old paper hates liars when enough hands finally start looking at it. The hospice packet Amelia had shown me years earlier had always lived in a drawer in my hall desk. I knew that because I never wanted to touch it again. Grief has a geography to it. Some drawers become mausoleums. I pulled the packet out Tuesday morning with Daniel standing beside me and suddenly felt stupid for how little I had ever studied it. The top page had a soft gray logo. Compassion House Hospice. Invoice summary. Past due totals. Condolence language printed in pale blue at the bottom, like someone thought they could turn debt collection into tissue paper. At the time, I had read only the final amount, then looked away. Now Daniel read line by line. He frowned almost immediately. "This account number has 2 different typefaces." "What?" He pointed. The first half of the account line was in one font, the last 4 digits in another. Tiny difference. Enough. Dennis took the page, put on his glasses, and went still in the way good analysts do when the room finally offers them something structural. He spread the rest of the packet out. Dates misaligned. One subtotal calculated wrong by $90.50. A page footer not matching the provider's public template from that year. A scanned signature line that looked just a little too clean against the grain of the rest of the copy. Then the final insult. A notice of urgent settlement opportunity dated on a Sunday when the provider's office had been closed. Ruth looked at the packet and said flatly, "She forged the grief." No one answered because there was nothing left to add. The sentence itself carried too much already. Dana had the packet taken for document analysis that afternoon. By Wednesday we had confirmation. Parts of the hospice bill were real. Real services. Real charges. Real balances that had already been largely covered by insurance and reserve funds. But the final catastrophic shortfall document Amelia showed me had been assembled. Not fully invented. Assembled. Selective real pages, modified totals, inserted urgency language. A stitched monster made from true fragments and false conclusions. That was her method in everything, really. Not pure fiction, much more sophisticated. Take enough reality to make doubt feel ungrateful, then bend the rest. Daniel took that finding harder than I expected, not because of the money, because of the funeral. He stood in my kitchen holding the copied hospice packet and said, "She used the week Mom died to make this." No one answered him. Again, no one needed to. Later that night, after Dana and Dennis left, he found me on the back porch with coffee gone cold in my hand. "Why didn't you call me?" he asked. There was no accusation in it. That made it worse. "Because I thought you were free," I said. He frowned. "Free from what?" "From this place, from your sister, from the dying, from me turning into a man who measured everything by blood tests and sympathy cards. You had a life. I thought calling you back into the center of it would just mean I was spreading grief around because I didn't know how to hold mine." Daniel leaned against the porch post, looked out at the dark yard. "That's a nice speech if you want to sound selfless," he said. "It's not the truth, though." I almost smiled. No. The truth is, you trusted Amelia because she was nearby, and because nearby feels like evidence when someone dies. And I let you. Because part of me was relieved not to be the one in the room all the time. That's on me too. I looked at him then, really looked. Gray at his temples, fine lines near his eyes, the same slight downward tilt to his left shoulder from an old skiing injury. A man now, not a boy who moved away, not a disappointment, not an absence. A man. "I'm sorry," I said. He nodded. "Me too." That was not reconciliation, not fully, but it was honest. And after the week we had just lived through, honesty felt more valuable than any polished emotional resolution could have. Wednesday brought the first statement from Amelia's lawyer. Predictable, offensive, polite. The detention of Miss Hawthorne follows a period of severe emotional strain and family conflict in which ordinary managerial decisions are being reframed through grief, distorted perspectives, and incomplete financial understanding. Miss Hawthorne acted at all times in what she believed were the best interests of Hawthorne Books and her father's emotional stability. Best interests, emotional stability, managerial decisions. Exactly the soft armor Dana said they'd reach for first. Dana drafted the response herself. Terse, ugly in the best way. If your client would like to explain why trust-linked royalties were diverted without disclosure, why forged hospice balances were used to solicit elder funds, why an exploratory sale packet misrepresented solvency, and why she described her father as easier to manage when he felt needed, we are available to listen. I would have paid money to watch that letter land on the other side. Then I remembered I had already paid too much money for this story. Thursday morning, Vera Coleman came by the house. She looked like she had not slept. I believed her. She carried a bakery box and a typed statement. "I know this may not matter," she said before I had even sat her down, "but I need you to know I didn't know. I should have seen something. Maybe I did see things and just liked the cleaner explanation better. But I didn't know." I took the statement from her. It detailed what Amelia had told donor circles over the past 2 years. The store is struggling but meaningful. Dad is helping until we stabilize. Daniel prefers distance. Mom wanted me to carry the torch. We may need new financing if winter goes poorly. The building is an opportunity if sentiment can be guided responsibly. Guided responsibly. That phrase again. Vera swallowed hard. She made it sound like stewardship. Brave, sad stewardship. And I liked the story because it made supporting the bookstore feel morally simple. Morally simple. There it was again. One of the real engines behind the whole thing. People prefer a neat, emotional story to messy truth. The donor class especially. Buy the cheese board. Sponsor the literacy night. Applaud the daughter who stayed. Go home feeling useful. Not many want to see the accounting under the candles. I asked Vera one thing. Did Amelia ever mention the royalties? Yes, she said immediately, but only as small continuing income that helps keep Mom's voice in the room. She never once implied they were significant enough to cover what she was describing as crisis. That mattered. Not because it created the first lie, because it showed pattern, selective truth, again and again. When she left, Ruth said, "You understand what this means." Yes, say it anyway. She sold the public a softer version of the same deception she sold me. Yes, that made the case stronger, but it also made the heartbreak wider. This was no longer just my grief misused. It was a community's goodwill turned into insulation. By Friday, detectives had executed a search on Willow Street Cultural Holdings. Not dramatic, just clean. Paper first, devices second, storage unit third. The storage unit was the one that mattered, not because it held cash. Real liars rarely keep neat stacks of cash after 40. They keep categories. Inside were 6 banker's boxes, seasonal event decor, old inventory signage, unused branded tote bags, a portable photo backdrop, tax files, and 3 labeled binders that made Dana sit down on the concrete floor and take pictures before touching them. Operating narrative, donor positioning, dad support timing. Those labels still make me sick. Dad support timing was exactly what it sounded like. A spreadsheet of when to ask me for money, how much to ask, and what emotional framing worked best in different months. Winter urgency, tax carryover, sentimental anniversary window, mom-related trigger language, use store not self. If resistance, soften with Eli mention. Do not overuse illness. Use responsibility language after church events. I read those lines once and walked out of the storage unit because if I had stayed 10 more seconds, I might have punched the cinder block wall hard enough to break my hand. Ruth found me outside beside a dented blue sedan. "You all right?" "No, good." I looked at her. "Good?" "Yes. Because if you were all right after reading that, I'd worry you were no longer salvageable as a human being." That almost helped. Almost. The donor positioning binder was worse in a different way. A practical guide to public sympathy. Lena legacy language. How to signal pressure without sounding incompetent. How to fold grief into donor appetite. Which local women preferred resilience stories over hardship stories. Which foundation board members responded best to community continuity. How much mention of Thomas was useful before it became too obvious. There are days in life when disgust becomes almost scientific. That day was one of them. And then there was operating narrative, the script, not literally word for word, worse, themes, shapes, emotional lanes. To father, focus on burden, duty, memory, continuity. Do not use big numbers unless unavoidable. He reacts to quiet shame better than pressure. If he asks to see books, say later and redirect to weather, payroll, or grief. If he starts referencing Ruth, escalate concern about stress and age. To Daniel, frame distance as emotional privilege. Suggest local complexity he cannot understand. Use mother loyalty language. If needed, accuse him of wanting liquidation while Amelia does the real work. To staff, speak of fragile months, not crisis. Maintain loyalty through shared purpose. Let them feel part of saving something. Do not show reserve variance. To donors, scarcity plus legacy. Never say profitable. Say sustainable if pressed. Hopeful strain photographs well. Hopeful strain photographs well. I remember reading that line and thinking there's no way my daughter wrote that. Then I saw the little triangle she drew instead of a dot over lowercase i's when she was moving fast, and I knew she had. There are few things more terrible than seeing your child's private habits inside a document built to manipulate you. By Saturday, charges had expanded. Not final counts yet, but enough. Forgery, trust concealment, fraudulent solicitation, elder financial exploitation, mail tampering review, conspiracy questions depending on what the consultant and broker communications showed. And through all of it, one question kept growing in me. When did Amelia stop loving us and start using us? I asked Ruth that on Saturday night while we sat at my kitchen table with the storage unit binders spread around us like autopsy parts. She answered without looking up. Wrong question. What's the right one? When did using you start feeling to her like a form of love? I stared at her. That's not better. No, but it's more dangerous. Evil is simpler. This is entitlement with memory attached. She loved your wife. She loves what your wife made possible. She may even love you in the abstract. But somewhere along the way, loving became less important than possessing. And possessing always ends up inventing justification. That answer kept me awake longer than coffee did, because it meant the clean line I wanted between daughter and thief might not exist. It meant Amelia had not woken one morning and become unrecognizable. She had simply let old resentments, old self-pity, and new opportunity build a private moral system until theft looked like correction. By Sunday, the town had chosen sides. Of course it had. Some people said Amelia had clearly gone too far. Some said grief and pressure make everyone strange. Some said I should have handled it privately because public scandal stains a legacy more than quiet family theft. Those people are always around, the ones who prefer smooth appearances to actual truth. They are why schemes like this last as long as they do. But then Marisol did something brave. She posted a short statement from the store account that Dana approved. Hawthorne Books belongs to readers, memory, and honest stewardship. We are temporarily closed while trust protections are restored. Lena Hawthorne built this place on literature, not manipulation. We ask for patience while the truth catches up to the story. That statement did more for me than any article had, because for the first time since the funeral, the store spoke in my wife's moral language again. Not hopeful strain, not polished burden, not brand capital, honest stewardship. The next week I opened Lena's letter to Amelia, not because strategy required it anymore, because I needed to hear my wife at full force. The letter was exactly as cruel and loving as I feared. Amelia, if this reaches you through formal channels, then you ignored my softer warnings. That saddens me more than it angers me. Anger is cleaner. Sadness is what remains when the child you still love starts making private arguments against honesty and calls those arguments maturity. You have always confused two ideas, being necessary and being entitled. When you were young, it made you helpful. When you were frightened, it made you controlling. When you were tired, it made you resentful. And if no one interrupted that pattern, I feared adulthood would make it expensive. I did not structure the trust because I doubted your competence. I structured it because competence without humility can become a very elegant form of harm. If you have reached the point of reading this after taking what was not yours, then understand this clearly. I did not fail to see your sacrifice. I failed only in hoping your sacrifice would teach you generosity instead of arithmetic. Nothing in this store was ever owed to the child who stayed more than to the child who left. Love does not reward proximity with ownership. It asks for honesty from both. If you are angry with me now, good. Anger may accomplish what tenderness could not. Perhaps it will finally force you to stop calling appetite duty. Lena, I folded the letter carefully and put it back in the envelope because if I had kept reading it in my hands, I might have burned something just to feel heat leave my body. That week did not heal anything. It only clarified. And clarity, I was learning, is not peace. It is just a firmer floor under the pain. The legal part took months. That is another cruelty adults do not talk about enough. You imagine that once truth breaks, justice will move with matching speed. It does not. Truth breaks like glass. Justice moves like furniture. Heavy, slow, dragging across the floor while everyone pretends the noise is procedural. Winter settled over town while motions stacked. First appearance, bond arguments, document production, digital extraction, trust review, forensic accounting, estate clarifications, donor questions, staff retention meetings, insurance conversations, temporary guardianship review for the store, emergency operating authority reversion. That last phrase meant the most. Emergency operating authority reverted to me, not because I wanted glory, because for the first time since Lena died, the paper agreed with reality. Hawthorne Books reopened on a limited schedule 6 weeks after the arrest. No gala, no soft launch, no photographer, no borrowed candles, and no aesthetic resilience language painted on chalkboards. Just unlocked doors, working lights, real inventory, and me at the front counter with Marisol on one side and Daniel on the other, because once this whole mess finally dragged him back east, he stayed longer than either of us expected. The first Saturday we reopened, a little girl of maybe 8 came in with her grandmother and asked if the story hour corner would ever come back. I looked at the empty chair under the mural wall where Lena used to sit and felt my throat tighten. Yes, I said, just not as a performance. Her grandmother looked at me strangely, then smiled like she understood more than I had actually said. Daniel took over logistics better than I expected, not because he suddenly became a bookseller, because he was an adult man with eyes, and eyes turned out to be rare enough in my family lately to count as a skill. He reorganized the back office, set up cleaner reporting, moved event invoices into one place, installed dual control on the operating account, built a shared dashboard Dennis approved, and once, while sorting old cafe receipts, he held up one of Amelia's present-spending floral invoices and said, deadpan, "I'm amazed carnations survived being used as evidence." That was the sort of line that kept me from breaking some afternoons. Ruth came by twice a week without warning and called it oversight. Dana came by when subpoenas or signatures required it. Dennis lived in our books for 2 full months and eventually emerged looking smug in the way only accountants and homicide detectives ever seem to enjoy. He found enough. Not secret millions. Nothing cinematic. That is not how adult fraud usually works. It works through layers. Rerouted royalties, inflated hardship narratives, misleading donor positioning, improper management expenses, consulting fees that served image rather than operations. And, perhaps most damaging legally, a documented pattern of asking me for funds on dates closely tied to known royalty deposits or event spending spikes. Meaning she often asked me for help not because the store had no money, because she had already chosen where the money was going and did not want restraint ruining the atmosphere. That distinction became the spine of the case. The prosecutors called it intentional financial misrepresentation within a trust-governed family enterprise. I called it looking me in the eye and lying for 3 years while I wore warehouse boots to keep my wife's memory alive. The state took the drier wording. I kept the truer one. Amelia stayed out on bond after the first hearing. That made me angrier than I expected, and then embarrassed me for being angry. Because I am old enough to know the law moves by standards, not feeling. Still, there is something obscene about knowing your child went home at night after building an empire out of deception while you spent evenings relearning how to trust your own front door. She moved into a furnished condo on the north side, not the nice one tied to Marcus and Natalie. That one had already been frozen through the asset review because the title structure stank of assisted concealment. No, Amelia's lawyer placed her in a temporary rental far enough from Willow Street to avoid immediate public hostility and close enough to court not to argue hardship. Marcus turned earlier than anyone expected. That surprised Dana, not me. Men like him mistake control for intelligence so often that once the control goes, they reveal themselves quickly. He pushed for separation, claimed Amelia independently redirected funds and exaggerated his role. Then the digital recovery showed his comments on multiple draft documents, his edits in the advisory packet, and one truly damning email to Paul Mercer. We do not need Thomas understanding numbers. We need him understanding burden. By the time he sees accounting, the property conversation should already feel like mercy. That email nearly guaranteed cooperation discussions. Natalie Hughes, meanwhile, proved even slipperier than Marcus. She admitted her relationship with him, denied operational knowledge, claimed she thought the trust entities were ordinary planning vehicles. Then the recovered messages showed she knew enough to be dangerous. One of them read, "If he still thinks I died, that means your girl has him buried deeper than I thought." your girl. Not naming Amelia directly, worse, making her sound like a useful specialist. Another, if the old man keeps paying, don't rush the building. You'll scare the daughter before she signs the cleaner paper. The daughter, not even Amelia by name then, just function. That was the thing I kept learning. People outside a family fraud system strip the family out of it almost immediately. To them, your daughter is not a daughter, she is an asset handler. Your grief is not grief, it is leverage. By January, the case stopped being a private scandal and became something uglier and wider. Because once financial exploitation touches a beloved community place, everybody sees their own vulnerability in it. Women who ran nonprofit theaters called Ruth asking how to protect board signatures. A widower who owned a frame shop asked Dennis if he should review his daughter's access to the business account. 3 church ladies wrote me one long letter that somehow combined sympathy, rage, and a soup recipe. Even the people who still wanted to defend Amelia changed their language. They stopped saying she did nothing wrong, started saying grief distorts people, which is what adults say when the evidence is too strong to deny, but the social shame of having admired the wrong person still needs somewhere to hide. In February, Daniel found something in the old upstairs apartment that changed my understanding of Lena one last time. Not a secret account, not another trust clause. Something smaller, a yellow legal pad inside the kitchen drawer, 3 pages written in Lena's hand. Not addressed, not dated, just notes. At first I thought they were draft essay fragments for her unfinished nonfiction collection. Then I realized they were about Amelia. Little observations, nothing legal, nothing strategized. A mother thinking in private. When she was 6, she cried because Daniel was praised for fixing a kite, but she had been the one who carried it home after the string snapped. When she was 12, she insisted helping should count the same as winning. When she was 23, she said staying in this town felt invisible unless someone else needed rescuing. I keep wondering whether she confuses being needed with being loved, because if she does, life will offer her too many ways to become useful in exchange for never becoming honest. That line undid me, because it was so gentle, so patient, so tired. Lena did not write like a prophet there. She wrote like a mother trying to think her daughter toward safety and failing. I sat with the pad in my lap that night and understood something I had been resisting. Amelia's crime was not born from nowhere. It had roots, not excuses, roots. And adulthood is cruel because it asks you to hold both things at once. A child you loved, a woman who deceived you, the roots and the rot. March brought the pretrial hearing. I had never seen Amelia in a courtroom before. That sentence still feels impossible. She wore navy, no jewelry except small pearl studs, hair neat, face controlled, the exact visual language of respectable regret. Her lawyer sat beside her with a stack of files and the kind of expensive patience that makes me distrust a person before he even stands up. When she looked at me across the room, she did not look guilty. Not really. She looked offended. That was the hardest part. Not that she had done it. That even after everything, some part of her still believed the room was misunderstanding her burden rather than judging her choices. The state laid out the broad picture. Trust concealment, fraudulent solicitation, forged hospice packet, attempted asset misrepresentation, improper diversion of royalties, conspiracy questions involving Marcus and related entities. Her lawyer pushed back exactly as expected. Miss Hawthorne was operating under prolonged stress. She believed she was preserving a fragile cultural institution. The family financial arrangements were informal, emotionally entangled, and lacking in consistently interpreted boundaries. At worst, this is a tragic family accounting dispute, misread through grief and resentment. Tragic family accounting dispute. That phrase made my hands shake. Not because it was clever, because I could already hear half the town repeating it over lunch if it ever escaped the room. Dana stood and corrected the temperature instantly. No, counselor. A tragic family accounting dispute does not usually include forged hospice documentation, a privately timed support solicitation spreadsheet, or a management packet drafted around age-related fatigue language to induce control over a life overseer's authority. If your client wishes to explain those items as misunderstanding, she is welcome to try under oath. That ended the soft part. The judge set trial for June. June. The same month Lena and I used to go to the Lakeside Inn for one quiet weekend before summer event season got silly at the store. Now June would mean testimony. I dreaded it more than I admitted to anyone. Not because I feared the facts, because trials force you to speak pain in full sentences under fluorescent lights while strangers take notes. And by then I had learned how exhausting full sentences can be. Spring returned slowly, the store steadied. Daniel extended his stay 1 month, then another. Marisol began running story hour on Saturdays for little kids exactly the way Lena would have liked it. No sponsorship banner, no donor plaque on the easel, just books, paper crowns, juice boxes, and actual reading. I started sleeping a little. Not much. Enough. Then, 2 weeks before trial, Amelia sent me a letter. Not through lawyers. Through the mail. Handwritten. Blue envelope. My name in her script. I held it for almost an hour before opening it. Thomas? No, that is how I remember it. She wrote Dad first, then scratched it out so deeply the paper nearly tore, then began again. I know everyone wants this to be simple and ugly. I know Ruth and Daniel have probably made me into a parasite in your mind. But there are things nobody will say out loud because they make everyone uncomfortable. Mom trusted me because I was there. You did not want to deal with the paper. Daniel did not want to come home. The store did not run on memory and moral purity. It ran on choices. I made those choices. Maybe badly, maybe selfishly in parts, but not alone, and not from nothing. You think I took your money because I enjoyed deceiving you. I took your money because every time I tried to imagine telling you the store was no longer just your wife's shrine, you looked at me like preserving her required freezing the building in 2019. You call it theft. I call it making movement possible. As for the hospice packet, yes, I changed the numbers. Because if I had shown you the actual balance, you would have asked questions about the reserves. And if you had asked about the reserves, you would have looked closer at everything. And if you had looked closer, every single thing Mom built would have fallen into legal delay and emotional paralysis. I chose velocity over purity. That is my sin. You all talk about truth as if truth is a clean thing. It is not. Sometimes truth is just the story the strongest person in the room gets to put in writing. I'm sorry for hurting you. I'm not sorry for understanding that grief is expensive and nostalgia does not manage payroll. Amelia, I read that letter 3 times. Then once out loud in the apartment above the store where Lena had hidden the green box. Because I needed the room that knew her to hear what our daughter had become. Velocity over purity. That line was the core of Amelia's religion. Movement at any cost. Image now, ethics later. As if momentum were its own absolution. Ruth read the letter and said, she still thinks competence can launder motive. Dana read it and said, thank God she writes like a woman who wants to be quoted. I kept the letter in the trial file, not because it helped me emotionally, because it completed her. If a jury needed to know the shape of her mind, that letter held it. Trial began on June 9th. The courtroom smelled like old wood, paper dust, and people trying very hard not to feel too much in public. Judge Halloran presided, 60-something, calm face, no patience for word games dressed in velvet. Jury selection took 2 days, 12 people and 2 alternates. Teachers, an electrician, a retired nurse, a woman who ran a bridal alterations business, a college administrator, a man from county planning who looked at me with the eyes of someone already thinking about trust documents and family property. Adults. Exactly the kind of adults who know love can coexist with paperwork and still fail both. Dana opened cleanly. This case is about grief, yes. But grief is not the defense. Grief is the doorway. The defendant used that doorway to redirect money, forge urgency, manipulate trust, and attempt to convert a family legacy into her personal structure while presenting herself publicly as its noble steward. Then she did something smart. She told the jury not to imagine a dramatic villain. She told them to imagine a competent daughter who began by justifying one shortcut, then another, until honesty itself became the only thing too expensive to keep. That was exactly right. Amelia's lawyer opened differently. He leaned into complexity, family dynamics, burnout, emotional burden, an absent son, a tired father, a local institution under pressure. And for one dangerous minute, I could feel the room wanting the softer version. Not because it was true, because adults are always tempted by a version of evil that remains forgivable. Then the evidence started. Howard Pike first. Steady, precise, quarterly royalty lines, redirected account, no documented amendment, no direct notice to me despite trust expectation because communications had been intercepted and explanations supplied through Amelia. Then Harold Mencken. Dry as winter wire. He explained store health, reserve structure, and the difference between tight operations and collapse so clearly that half the jury took notes like it was a seminar. He also said, under oath, one can run a modest bookstore honestly through difficult cycles. One cannot call it dying while simultaneously increasing aesthetic and consultancy outlays unless one is managing appearance more than solvency. I wanted to shake his hand then and there. Marisol testified next. No theatrics, just truth. The store was not failing. Amelia called donations and redirected funds oxygen. Large decorative spending often coincided with incoming royalty periods. And yes, Amelia often told staff that Mr. Hawthorne was generous, but emotionally simpler if the money request was framed around Lena rather than operations. That sentence turned every head in the jury box. Emotionally simpler. The truth can be devastating when it is small enough to sound natural. Then came Dennis with charts. Dear God, the charts. Blue bars, red lines, timing overlays, transfers from me against royalty deposits, diversion account activity against event spending, patterns no ordinary family misunderstanding could explain away. Even Amelia stopped looking bored during Dennis. By the end of week 1, the room no longer felt tempted by the soft version, and still, the hardest day had not come. Mine was still ahead. The day I testified, I wore the same charcoal suit I had worn to Lena's funeral. I did not choose it for symbolism. I chose it because old men have a limited rotation of suits and grief had already claimed one of them permanently in my mind. Still, when I buttoned the jacket that morning, I caught myself looking in the mirror longer than usual. Not to admire anything. To make sure the man looking back at me could hold a full day in court without collapsing into apology or rage. Ruth drove with me. Neither of us talked much. At one red light, she reached over, straightened my tie knot without asking, and said, "Don't narrate your own guilt for them. They have enough facts." That turned out to be the most useful instruction of the day, because the temptation on a witness stand is to confess everything that isn't legally yours just because it feels morally adjacent. I almost lost my wife. I trusted the wrong child. I stopped reading. I let grief make me passive. I sold my truck because I thought my daughter was saving a dying store while she used my wife's death as a billing template. All of that was true. Not all of it belonged in the legal center of the case. Dana reminded me of that just before we went in. Answer what is asked. Do not decorate pain. Do not protect Amelia from her own sentences. And do not turn this into a speech about fatherhood unless I ask for it on redirect. I nodded. Then she added almost kindly, "If you need to look at someone while you answer, look at me, not her." Good advice. I did not take it every time. When I stepped into the courtroom, Amelia was already seated at the defense table. Navy again, hair smooth, face composed. Only this time there was fatigue around the edges, not remorse. Where? The machinery of consequence had started to mark her. I took the oath, sat down, felt every eye in the room on me. Dana began simply, "Mr. Hawthorne, can you tell the jury who Lena Hawthorne was? There are questions that look easy until your chest fills with your whole adult life." "My wife," I said, then steadied. She was my wife for 34 years. She ran Hawthorne Books. She wrote children's books. She believed reading was one of the few good ways to make a town gentler without anybody noticing they'd been changed. That line got a small sound from somewhere in the gallery. Not crying exactly. Recognition, maybe. Dana took me carefully through the years after Lena's death. The funeral. Amelia handling the visible paper. The story about hospice debt, the monthly requests, the truck sale, the warehouse shifts, the bank meeting, the safety box, the trust packet, the bookstore observations, the donor breakfast, the advisory packet, the community partner reception. She did not rush. That mattered. Adult juries do not need melodrama. They need sequence. Then she asked the question that made my hands go cold even though I knew it was coming. "When your daughter asked you for financial help, why did you give it?" "Because I thought I was helping my wife's bookstore survive," I said. "And because I thought I was helping my daughter carry the burden of losing her mother while preserving the thing Lena loved most." "Did you know about the redirected royalties?" "No." "Did you know about the trust reserve?" "No." "Did you know the store was not in collapse?" "No." "Did you ever authorize Amelia Hawthorne to conceal trust summaries from you?" "No." "Did you ever authorize her to redirect estate-linked royalties into Willow Street Cultural Holdings?" "No." "Did you ever tell her she could alter hospice documentation or use your wife's illness to solicit support from you?" "No." Dana nodded once, then placed the forged hospice packet on the evidence screen. Next to it, the authentic hospice summary. "Same paper family. Different truth. Do you recognize these? Yes. Which one were you shown?" "The false one." "How do you know?" "Because the real one doesn't say what she told me it said." That line did more work than I expected. The defense cross-examined me for almost an hour. He was not a stupid man. That made him more tiring than threatening. He never tried to turn me into a fool. He tried to turn me into a participant. "Mr. Hawthorne, you loved your daughter. Yes, you trusted her. Yes. You did not insist on oversight. No. You preferred not to deal with paperwork after your wife died. Yes, you never asked for bank statements. No. You never demanded independent audits. No. You sent money willingly. Yes. So is it fair to say your family financial practice after Lena Hawthorne's death was informal?" "No," I said. He paused. "No. No. My behavior was informal. My wife's trust was not." That answer was Ruth's influence and Dana's rehearsal and Lena's paper all at once. It landed well. I saw it hit 2 jurors in the exact way it needed to. The defense lawyer adjusted. "Did Amelia take on significant work at the store after your wife died?" "Yes." "Did she bear real operational stress?" "Yes." "Did she preserve the bookstore as a functioning institution during a difficult period?" I looked at him, then at the jury, then answered carefully. "She preserved her access to it. The institution survived because my wife planned it to. Not because my daughter had a special right to turn grief into private authority. That was the hardest I hit all day. Hard enough. Not too hard." He tried one last thing. "Mr. Hawthorne, isn't it possible your daughter believed her decisions were necessary?" That question hung in the courtroom for a long second. Then I said the truest thing I knew. A person can believe a theft is necessary and still know it's a theft. Silence. The defense sat down. On redirect, Dana asked only one question. "Mr. Hawthorne, if your daughter had asked you honestly for help managing growth, debt, staff, or even her own resentment after Lena Hawthorne's death, would you have helped her?" "Yes," I said immediately. I would have helped her with any honest thing she asked for. That ended my testimony. When I stepped down, I made the mistake Dana warned me about. I looked at Amelia. She was already looking at me, not crying, not shaking, not broken, just staring with this strange mixture of anger and injury, as if I had violated some private family code by refusing to keep her lie indoors. I looked away first. Not because she won anything. Because I was tired of seeing my daughter choose offense over sorrow. Marcus took the stand the following day under cooperation terms. No jury likes a man like Marcus once they hear him too long. He sounded too pleased with his own analysis even while admitting wrongdoing. Too impressed with the architecture of the manipulation. He tried to frame himself as a professional who crossed lines gradually under emotional influence from Amelia and strategic confusion around family expectations. Dana dismantled that in under 20 minutes by reading his own email back to him. We do not need Thomas understanding numbers. We need him understanding burden. The courtroom became very quiet. Then she asked, "Did those words describe treatment?" "No." "Did they describe bookkeeping?" "No." "What did they describe?" He swallowed, then said, "Influence." She did not let him off there. Influence for what purpose? To preserve control of the estate narrative and avoid scrutiny of the redirected funds. There are moments when a courtroom stops being abstract. That was one of them. Even the defense did not try to soften that sentence. There was nowhere left to go with it. Paul Mercer and Richard Bales were smaller witnesses. Useful, though. They confirmed the advisory packet, the sale curiosity, the way Amelia spoke of unlocking the building and de-emotionalizing family resistance. Bales actually used the phrase legacy friction on the stand. Dana made him repeat it twice. Sometimes the cleanest way to show rot is just to let polished people say polished things slowly. Then came the day Amelia testified. I had not wanted her to. Not because I feared the facts. Because I knew enough about her by then to understand that public self-justification was one of the only stages on which she still felt truly competent. She took the stand in cream this time. No navy, softer, calculated. As if she and her lawyer had realized the severe professional daughter look was overcooked, and now they needed wronged female child of high expectation. She cried early. That was deliberate, not fake exactly, timed. She spoke about Lena's illness, about nights sleeping in the apartment above the store, about stress, about Daniel being gone, about me retreating into silence in the machine shop, about fear that the bookstore would become a mausoleum, about staff depending on her, about customers expecting miracles, about every day feeling like she was carrying both her mother's voice and my collapse. It was compelling in places. That is what made it infuriating, because much of it was true enough to hurt. She had carried things, she had stayed, she had watched her mother die, she had watched me become smaller after the funeral. Those facts were real. Then she crossed the line all over again. I never meant to steal from my father, she said. I moved money because I thought if I told him the real volatility, he would freeze. He has always frozen when paper gets cruel. He loves beautifully, but not administratively. So I made administrative choices. Administrative choices. Dana waited, then stood for cross. Administrative choices. Let's use your phrase, Miss Hawthorne. She walked Amelia through the forged hospice packet first. Did you alter the hospice summary? Yes. Why? Because the actual numbers would have required long explanations at the worst possible time. So you altered them? Yes. Did your father know you altered them? No. Then Dana moved to the royalties. Did you redirect the royalties into Willow Street Cultural Holdings? Yes. Did you tell your father? No. Did you tell Trust Council? No. Did you provide annual summaries to the life overseer as required? No. Did you create a spreadsheet called Dad Support Timing? A long pause. Then yes. Did that spreadsheet include recommendations such as use store not self, sentimental anniversary window, and if resistance, soften with Eli mention? Amelia's face changed. Just slightly, yes. Did you describe your father in that spreadsheet as easier to manage when he felt needed? Yes. There were no theatrics in Dana's voice. That made it lethal. Then Dana did the thing I had almost feared she might not do. She asked about love. Miss Hawthorne, did you love your father during the period in which you diverted royalties, concealed the trust, and solicited funds through a forged hospice shortfall? Amelia blinked, thrown for the first time. Yes, she said. Dana nodded. Did you love your mother? Yes. Did you love Hawthorne books? Yes. Then help the jury understand something. At what point, while loving all three, did it become acceptable to treat all three as things you were allowed to reorganize without permission? That question landed harder than any spreadsheet, because money can be argued, intent can be massaged, but that question forced the moral shape of what she had done into the center of the room. Amelia did not answer immediately. Then she said the sentence that sealed her fate more completely than I think even she understood. When no one else will do what reality requires, love and permission become luxuries. There it was. Not confusion, not mistake, not pressure, philosophy. Her philosophy. Dana did not move for a second. Then she said, "Thank you, no further questions." The jury looked different after that. Even from my seat I could feel it. The last soft defenses had gone out of the room. Closing arguments came 2 days later. The defense tried for tragic overreach, a daughter under impossible pressure, bad boundaries, informal family practice, money moved for the sake of the store, ill-considered document handling and grief. A case that should end with restitution and shame, not criminal labels. Dana answered with exactly the right kind of fire. Not hot, controlled. This case is not about whether grief makes people messy. It does. It is not about whether family businesses are emotionally entangled. They are. It is about choice. The defendant forged a hospice shortfall to extract funds from her father. She concealed trust summaries because transparency would have ended her access. She rerouted royalties because ordinary bookkeeping would have constrained her. She courted a sale while telling the victim the store was too fragile for scrutiny. And when asked why, she did not say she was confused. She said permission had become a luxury. That is not stress. That is entitlement promoted to governance. I will remember that sentence until I die. Entitlement promoted to governance. The jury deliberated for 9 hours. 9 hours is long enough to imagine every bad version of your future, and short enough to keep hope cruel. I spent those hours in a private waiting room with Daniel, Ruth, Dana, and coffee no one wanted. At one point, Daniel fell asleep in his chair for 15 minutes with his mouth open and one hand still holding a legal pad. Ruth covered him with her coat and pretended she had not. That nearly undid me more than the trial had. At 5:19, the clerk came in. We filed back into the courtroom. Same wood, same seal, same tired fluorescent light. The four-persons stood. On count 1, elder financial exploitation, guilty. On count 2, forgery, guilty. On count 3, fraudulent misrepresentation tied to trust administration, guilty. On count 4, concealment of trust communications and financial diversion, guilty. On the lesser civil count related to attempted asset disposition through deceptive solvency representation, liable. I do not remember hearing the rest cleanly, only the rhythm, guilty, guilty, guilty. Some people cry when verdicts come. I did not. I just felt the room stop lying. That was all. Not peace, not triumph. Just the room finally stopping its performance. Amelia stood very still while the clerk read the counts. No breakdown, no collapse, no plea for me to save her from the consequences of the story she had built. When the judge asked if counsel wished to request immediate remand, her lawyer did. The state agreed on some counts, opposed on others. Judge Holleran remanded on the exploitation and forgery counts pending sentencing review. That was the first moment Amelia looked scared. Not because guilt had landed morally, because the architecture had become physical. She turned once before being taken through the side door, looked at me, opened her mouth, then stopped. That was right. There was nothing useful left for either of us to say in that room. Sentencing happened 6 weeks later. By then, the civil side had advanced too. The trust had formally triggered forfeiture of Schedule C for Amelia under Lena's clause. $1.8 million that had existed in her head as future entitlement evaporated back into the educational endowment. She would never receive it. The irony was brutal and clean. The thing she risked everything to access destroyed itself the moment she crossed the lines my wife had designed. Judge Halloran imposed a sentence that made half the town say too much and the other half say not enough. 18 months custodial on the core fraud counts. Suspended tail, subject to restitution compliance, full restitution order. Permanent bar from trust management, estate handling, or executive authority within Hawthorne Books. Court-supervised repayment schedule from liquidated personal assets and frozen accounts. And language, very direct language, about the deliberate exploitation of bereavement for financial control. When the judge said that last part, I looked down at my hands, because some truths still sound unbearable even after you have proved them. Deliberate exploitation of bereavement. That was what the law called it. The law was right. After sentencing, reporters waited outside the courthouse. I hated them for about 20 seconds. Then I remembered they were not the ones who had done this. One woman asked if I believed justice had been served. I said, justice is a strong word. The books may balance now, but the family won't. What happened to my wife's memory and my daughter's conscience won't be fixed by a sentence. But truth matters, and today the truth got written where no one can edit it. That quote ran in 3 papers. Ruth said it made me sound wiser than I was. Daniel said it made me sound exactly as tired as I actually felt. Both were probably right. Summer came, Hawthorne Books changed again. Not into a monument. Lena would have hated that. Not into a lifestyle brand. I would have burned it down first. Into a bookstore. Just that. A real one. We reopened the upstairs reading room under its old intended name, the Lantern Room. No luxury literary residency. No mixed-use fantasies. No event strategy language. Just long oak tables, good lamps, community writing classes on Tuesdays, and a small scholarship shelf featuring local teachers' recommendations in Lena's honor. Daniel stayed through August, then moved back east fully in September. That surprised both of us. He rented a small house near the river and split time between remote work and the store's operations systems because, as he put it, some distances turn out to be habits, not geography. Marisol became cafe and events director officially. We gave her the title, the pay, and the authority she had already earned years earlier, while other people were buying flowers with stolen money and calling it presents. Dennis stayed on as financial overseer longer than any of us expected, because once a man has discovered the pleasure of clean books after messy fraud, he can become strangely sentimental about spreadsheets. Ruth continued appearing uninvited and calling it vigilance. I was grateful every time. And me. I stopped the warehouse shifts, paid down the ugly refinance on the shop, bought another used truck. Not as good as the first one. Nothing ever is, but serviceable. Blue. Slight dent in the rear panel. Mine. One Saturday in October, almost exactly a year after Howard Pike asked me why I had stopped depositing my wife's royalty checks, I went up to the apartment above the store alone and finally opened Lena's unfinished essay draft from the desk. The title page read, "Things That Stay Honest in Small Towns." The first essay began with a line that felt like she had reached through death just to startle me on purpose. People think memory preserves places. It doesn't. Only stewardship does. Memory without stewardship is just sentiment with dust on it. I sat down in the chair by the window and laughed until I cried. Because of course, my wife had already written the moral of the whole story before the story had fully happened. Of course, she had seen that memory alone was too passive. That love unguided by vigilance turns into invitation. That grief, if left unguarded, makes the kindest people the easiest to steer. That night, Daniel came by the house with a bottle of red wine and a pie from the bakery. He said the pie was peace-offering quality and the wine was Tuesday courage quality. We sat on the back porch, the air cold enough for jackets, and talked about nothing legal for the first time in a year. Then, eventually, he asked the question that had probably been sitting between us since June. "Do you think you'll ever see her, Amelia?" I looked out at the dark yard, at the machine shop, at the porch light. Ordinary things again. "I don't know," I said. "Do you want to?" That took longer. "I want to understand how to live with the truth without handing her the right to rewrite it again." He nodded. "That sounds like you trying to be noble." "No," I said. "It sounds like me trying not to be stupid twice." That actually made him laugh. A real one. Warm. Unexpected. The kind that reminds you blood can still behave like family even after being stretched almost too far. Then he looked at me and said, "For what it's worth, Mom would have been unbearable about this." I smiled despite myself. In what way? She'd be devastated, furious, heartbroken, smug about the trust, and absolutely impossible about the bookkeeping. That got me, because it was perfectly true. Somewhere in the middle of laughing and swallowing grief at the same time, I realized something had shifted. Not healed, shifted. For years after Lena died, every room in my life had felt like a place where something had stopped. Conversation, color, certainty. Now some rooms had started again. Different, not cleaner, just honest. The final thing I want to tell you about this story happened in December, a little over a year after the bank, a little over 6 months after the verdict. The Christmas rush was in full swing. Hawthorne Books was packed in that specific winter way where cold air, wet coats, children's voices, and the smell of coffee make a bookstore feel more like a living room than a business. I was at the front counter, wrapping a picture book for a grandmother who had already changed her mind twice when a teacher from the middle school walked in with 12 students behind her. Reading club, big scarves, too much noise. Exactly the kind Lena would have loved. One of the girls wandered toward the front display and stopped at the brass plaque we had finally mounted beneath Lena's photograph. Lena Hawthorne, reader-writer, steward. That last word had been Daniel's choice. Not wife, not founder, not beloved soul of the store. Steward. The girl looked at it and asked me, "What does steward mean?" I thought for a second. Then I said, "It means someone who takes care of something like it matters and like it doesn't belong only to them." She nodded like that made complete sense. Kids do that sometimes. Accept truths adults spend years complicating. Then she asked, "Was she your mom?" "My wife," I said. "Was she nice?" I looked at Lena's picture, then at the store, at Marisol carrying a tray of cocoa to the reading room, at Daniel arguing gently with a supplier near the back office, at the display table stacked with new anniversary editions of Sparrow Hollow that had finally launched under honest contracts 6 months after trial. "Yes," I said. "She was nice. But more important than that, she was fair." The girl nodded and went back to her friends. I stood there with wrapping paper in my hands and realized fair had become the word that mattered most to me. Not successful, not admired, not resilient. Fair. Fair books, fair paper, fair asking, fair love, fair inheritance, fair truth. Because unfairness had been Amelia's fuel from the beginning. She mistook her private tally of sacrifice for moral authority. She believed staying near the fire gave her the right to decide who burned and who paid for the water. That is what destroyed her. Not ambition, not grief. Unfairness dressed as duty. If you are listening to this story and waiting for me to tell you some easy moral about money, let me disappoint you. Money mattered. Of course it mattered. $350,000 can wound a man. A building worth over $3 million can turn decent people into sharks with tasteful eyewear. A future inheritance large enough to feel deserved can rot a person from the inside if they start spending it in their mind too early. But the deepest damage here was not money. It was narrative. My daughter told a story in which she was the one who stayed, the one who carried, the one who suffered, the one who did what had to be done while the men around her grieved poorly or lived too far away to count. She told that story so often and to so many people that eventually she stopped experiencing it as strategy and started experiencing it as truth. That is the danger. Not just lying, becoming loyal to the lie because it explains your pain in a way that makes you the hero. I have thought a lot about fathers this past year, about what men my age mistake for wisdom, about what we call trust when it is really avoidance, about what we call support when it is really a refusal to ask one more painful question. My worst failure was not loving too much. People say that when they want to sound noble in the wreckage. No. My worst failure was confusing kindness with stewardship. I thought being decent meant avoiding suspicion. I thought grief had earned everyone softer scrutiny. I thought my daughter's closeness was evidence of honesty. I thought my son's distance meant he had less standing to question what was happening at home. I was wrong on every count that mattered. If I could go back, I would ask sooner, read sooner, call Ruth sooner, climb the apartment stairs sooner, take the folder from the drawer and look at the line items with the same respect I would give a strange noise in an engine. Because quiet damage is still damage, and by the time quiet damage becomes visible, it has usually already been paid for twice. As for Amelia, people always ask the same question when they find out what happened. Do you still love her? What a terrible question, and what a human one. Love does not vanish on command because a court enters a sentence. If it did, family betrayal would be easier and much less interesting. Love remains. So does disgust. So does grief. So does the memory of a little girl crying over a kite spool and an adult woman forging her mother's hospice balance. Adulthood does not ask you to choose one memory. It asks you to carry all of them without letting the warmest one erase the truest one. I have not visited Amelia. Maybe I will. Maybe I won't. If I do, it will not be to offer her back the story she lost. It will be to speak plainly for once and refuse every soft word she ever used as cover. And if I never go, that will not be hatred either. Sometimes distance is just the final form of honesty. Daniel still teases me that I sound philosophical now. Ruth says I sound tired with punctuation. Marisol says I sound like a man who finally understands why bookstores matter. Dennis says I sound expensive because every lesson I've learned this year could have been avoided with better internal controls. He's not wrong, but here's the truth. A year ago, I thought my wife had left me debt, a tired daughter, and a dying store. Now I know she left me a trust, a warning, an unfinished book, and a chance I almost did not deserve to use well. That is more than many men get. So if you take anything from my story, let it be this. Do not let grief make you admire silence. Do not let guilt do other people's bookkeeping. Do not assume the child who stays is automatically the child who tells the truth. And if someone keeps asking for your help while making you feel smaller for wanting paper, they are not protecting you. They are positioning you. Love people. Absolutely. Support them. Feed them. Carry them through funerals and winters and terrible bills if you can. But read. Always read. Because the difference between generosity and exploitation is often only visible in the line you were too heartbroken to examine. That is not cynicism. That is stewardship. And if there is any peace in what happened to me, it is this. Hawthorne Books did not become what Amelia imagined. It did not become a lifestyle property. It did not become a mixed-use concept. It did not become a donor sculpture with coffee. It remained a bookstore, a real one, no cleaner than life, no grander than its shelves, just honest enough to deserve tomorrow. Lena would have liked that. I know because on the first snow of this past winter, Daniel came into the store before opening and found me standing by the front window with my coat still on, looking at the empty street and the first soft white on the awning. He asked what I was doing. I told him I was listening. For what? For the bell over the door, I said. Your mother always said the bell sounded more truthful in winter. Did it? Yes. And for the first time since she died, I realized it did not sound like mourning anymore. It sounded like business, honest business, the kind she built, the kind I failed to protect for a while, the kind we finally got back. And if that is not a miracle, it is at least a form of mercy I did not think old men like me still got. Thank you for walking through this story with me. If it made you angry, good. Some stories should. If it made you think harder about trust, paper, family, grief, and what people do when they decide their pain has earned them private rights over public truth, better. And if it reminded you to ask one more question before handing over your wallet, your signature, or your peace of mind, then maybe Lena's unfinished book is still doing its work through me. Because in the end, that is all any of us really leave behind. Not money, not buildings, not polished stories. The habits of honesty we either taught or failed to teach. My wife tried to teach them. My daughter tried to outmaneuver them. My son helped me rebuild them. And I, late as always but not too late, finally learned to read before I raged. That has to count for something. Take care of what matters. And do not ever let anybody turn your love into their ledger.